Otherwise, why would he encounter this situation out of nowhere? There must be someone orchestrating this. Perhaps it was the prophet he dreamed about. However, Jian Wushuang couldn't directly tell Xiangyang, as saying it would be pointless. At his peak, Xiangyang was merely a ninth tribulation universe master. Although he was on the same level, there was a significant difference in their combat power and realm. Jian Wushuang was at the peak of the 9-star universe god. He had visited the Realm King's divine realm, met the Great Realm King, and was even connected to the Star Spirit. In terms of knowledge and strength, they were on completely different levels. They also had different perspectives on things. Before entering this world, there were demons that rushed out. They were all universe gods, and their strength was quite good. These demon gods found it difficult to escape, which meant they had to recultivate to the level of universe gods. At the very least, they needed to be 6-star universe gods to get out. If that was the case, even Jian Wushuang lacked confidence. In the outside world, he had the guidance of his teacher, Xianxia, various fortuitous encounters, and later the help of Qixin Temple, Realm King, and even the Star Spirit, which gave him the combat power of a universe god. But in this world, who would help him? The prophet? That was an unknown factor. The only thing that might be able to help him was Wanlu Divine Tree behind Zhangshang. Perhaps a Star Spirit was also in this place. This was Jian Wushuang's thought. So, he wanted to take Zhangshang with him, or rather, follow Zhangshang, helping her become a super strong practitioner. In the future, he could take her out. For now, this was the best plan he could think of. After thinking for a moment, he patted Xiangyang on the shoulder and said, "Some things aren't as simple as you think. We've lost more than just our strength. We've lost our aptitude. With our current aptitude, how far do you think we can go?" On the other hand, Zhangshang has good talent. Perhaps training her might be much faster than cultivating ourselves. Is that really what you think? Xiangyang was somewhat incredulous. Training a mortal. It indeed sounded a bit absurd. No, it was very absurd. Jian Wushuang nodded and said to Xiangyang, "Really?" Having received confirmation, Xiangyang didn't say anything more, just secretly sighed. He felt that Jian Wushuang had lost confidence. "Forget it, let's not talk about this. How is your cultivation going?" "I have already reached the innate realm. This world's cultivation system is indeed different from the outside world. Clearly, there is power in cultivation, yet it remains hidden within the body, and you have to condense some ridiculous golden core to let your aura leak out." Xiangyang couldn't help but complain. In the outside world, just relying on the power of bloodline could make one's aura soar to the heavens. This allowed one to skip the initial stages of cultivation. Of course, things were different here. They were now ordinary people. About the same as you, but just reaching the golden core stage would take about half a year of cultivation. We can't waste that much time. Once the matter with the Jiang Kingdom is settled, we'll head to the Tang Dynasty to seek natural treasures and quickly improve our realms. Jian Wushuang clenched his fist. He was no longer the chosen one, so he had to bring Zhangshang along. However, he also had to quell Zhangshang's attachment to the Jiang Kingdom. This was quite troublesome. With past lessons in mind, he didn't dare to act rashly. He could only go with the flow. After a short chat, someone came to report from outside, saying that Li Mi had invited them. "Let's go, we'll act tonight." Jian Wushuang got up and led Xiangyang straight to the Li residence. As they entered the gate, the two of them could feel a chilling aura. In the backyard, 300 death warriors had already assembled. They were waiting for nightfall. Li Mi invited the two into the house and introduced, "This is my son, Li Fu. He will accompany you on this mission. Greetings to both of you." Li Fu was thin and looked unwell, but his tone was polite. Jian Wushuang and Xiangyang both nodded in acknowledgement, exchanging greetings. Lord Li openly assassinating the eldest princess like this, won't it attract some peoples? Jian Wushuang went straight to the point. He still felt it was somewhat abrupt. At the very least, there should be some pretext, like announcing that the eldest princess had colluded with enemies and betrayed the country. That would be more justifiable. Charging into the eldest princess's residence so recklessly seemed a bit hard to justify. The situation is urgent. There's no time for that. A decisive battle could break out at any time in Wolf Mountain County. If we don't clear the internal issues now, the Jiang Kingdom will truly be finished. Li Mi was a bit sad. He had deep feelings for the old emperor and was one of the entrusted ministers. He couldn't just watch the Jiang royal family fall to such a state. Even if the Jiang Kingdom fell, he wanted to protect the last legitimate heir. All right then. Jian Wushuang said no more, waiting with Li Mi for the night to fall. An hour later, the sky was completely dark. Li Mi led them out of the room, his gaze sweeping over the 300 neatly arranged death warriors in the courtyard, like an icy mountain. He shouted with a voice that had been suppressed in his chest for a long time. "Start the operation." Swish! The 300 death warriors drew their swords in unison, led personally by Li Fu, and climbed over the wall. Seeing this, Jian Wushuang and Xianxia exchanged glances but said nothing, nodding to Li Mi before following. The northwest gate of the imperial palace was wide open, with no guards in sight. Li Fu led the 300 death warriors, entering in single file. Jian Wushuang and Xianxia followed behind, not rushing in immediately. The two were the last to enter the palace. But just as they entered, Jian Wushuang felt a cold wind blowing. The wind carried a chill and a sharp killing intent. Clang! The clash of metal made Jian Wushuang frown. He immediately shouted to the death warriors rushing ahead, "Beware of ambush!" But it was too late. Arrows soared through the sky, humming as they descended upon them. Jian Wushuang drew his sword to deflect them, while Xianxia pulled out a short sword, knocking the arrows aside. But the death warriors weren't so lucky. Even though they were well trained, such a large group was hard-pressed to fend off the arrows. In an instant, most were killed or wounded. As the second wave of arrows came, everyone scrambled for cover. Jian Wushuang also pulled Xianxia behind a stone lion for shelter. What's happening? Xianxia was stunned. Their plan was supposed to be secretive. They had even informed the palace with Zhang Shang's approval. How could there be an ambush? Jian Wushuang didn't know either and could only take things one step at a time. After several waves of arrows, out of the 300, more than half were dead or injured and no longer able to fight. At that moment, a squad of heavily armored infantry advanced along the city wall. The leader, wielding a halberd and tugging the reins, shouted angrily, "Li Fu, come out!" Hiding behind a stone staircase, Li Fu stood up upon hearing this. "You Wencheng, are you planning to betray us?" Li Fu glared fiercely at him. He knew this man, the leader of the palace's imperial guards, Yu Wencheng. "Stop the sophistry. Leading troops to storm the palace. You're the one committing treason." Yu Wencheng threw down a bundle with a wave of his hand and scolded angrily. "Li Mi is dead. And today, you will die too." A head rolled out of the bundle. It was Li Mi, who had just parted ways with Jian Wushuang and his companions. Now, however, they were separated by life and death. Seeing his father's head, Li Fu was instantly enraged. "Yu Wencheng, you damned traitor. I will fight you to the death." Li Fu charged forward, breaking through the heavy encirclement. The loyal guards behind him followed suit, charging into the fray without regard for their own safety. However, Jian Wushuang and Xianxia did not follow. Instead, they took a detour, seizing the opportunity to escape deeper into the palace. As for Li Fu, he had already perished under the blades. Yu Wencheng personally pursued Jian Wushuang and Xianxia. Clearly, word of this plan had leaked out. Although it seemed flawless, they had overlooked a crucial detail. Visiting the palace at night, they only informed the imperial guards and never considered that there might be people loyal to the princess among them. Jian Wushuang was somewhat regretful now. He shouldn't have listened to Li Mi. He should have gone alone to meet the princess, or openly fought against them. That would have been better than sneaking around. Now, they had instead become traitors. To prove their innocence, they had to find Zhang Shang. Fortunately, it was just a mundane palace, so Jian Wushuang and Xianxia scaled 2 walls and entered the harem. Along the way, they captured a young eunuch to inquire about Zhang Shang's residence, and then made their way there. Xinxian Palace. Two dark figures slipped past the guards and arrived at the main hall. As soon as they entered, a presence came toward them. "It's me," Jian Wushuang said coldly, pulling aside the screen. Zhang Shang, dressed in a white robe, stood on the dragon bed. There was no one else around. Seeing Jian Wushuang, Zhang Shang asked in surprise, "Weren't you supposed to go to the Eastern Palace with Li Fu today? Why are you here? Have you already dealt with that monster? The Yu Wencheng from the palace guards has likely betrayed us. We must leave now or it will be too late," Jian Wushuang urged anxiously. They had fallen into a trap. The princess must have detected their plan in advance and was going to tear down the facade today. If they didn't leave now, they would be captured by the enemy. Impossible. Yu Wencheng is the prime minister's son. How could he? Zhang Shang shook his head in disbelief, trying to refute. But a sudden demonic wind gave her no time for doubt. A red silhouette swept in from outside the hall. Her sleeves blotted out the sky, demonic aura pervasive. "This is trouble." Jian Wushuang and Xianxia quickly retreated. The mountain spirit had arrived. "TSK, little girl, is this your technique?" The princess stepped in, dressed in red, her voice haunting. As she entered the main hall, the doors behind her closed automatically. Clearly, she wasn't planning to let them go. "So, you're a flower demon." Seeing the mark on the opponent's forehead, Xiangyang mocked. "A flower demon like you, I wouldn't even keep as a guard dog in the past. Yet here you are acting all high and mighty. Impudent." The flower demon shouted angrily, sending a long sleeve flying towards Xiangyang. Jian Wushuang leaped over, slicing the long sleeve with his sword. Beneath the sleeve was a root-like appendage akin to grass or wood. After being severed, dark red blood oozed out. Holding his divine sword, Jian Wushuang said coldly, "You're a flower demon. Why not cultivate peacefully in the mountains? Why do you persist in haunting Jiang country? Besides, Zhang Shang doesn't have much inner energy for you to siphon. What are you thinking?" He knew that she had practiced some demonic art, but a spirit of flora, even with demonic cultivation, shouldn't be able to absorb human blood. Of course, there were techniques that allowed it, but those required at least an immortal level of cultivation. That was far beyond the reach of a demon who had only just transcended the mundane. If such a technique did exist, it would be extremely unlucky for them. As expected, after hearing his question, the flower demon hesitated and said in surprise, "You two little ones in the innate stage actually know quite a bit, but I don't have time to explain to you two ants. Aren't you also in the innate stage without even forming a golden core? Yet you're pretending to be a master." Jian Wushuang sneered. The flower demon had not yet condensed a golden core and was still in the innate stage. If she and Xiangyang were in the early innate stage, then the opponent was at the peak of the innate stage. Of course, aside from the two of them, there was also Zhang Shang. According to Jian Wushuang's judgment, Zhang Shang also possessed the strength of the peak innate stage. 3 against 1, the advantage was on their side. Zhang Shang stepped down from the dragon bed and boldly removed her long robe, leaving only her inner garments, revealing her fragrant shoulders. Jian Wushuang couldn't help but blush and awkwardly said, "Zhang Shang, what are you doing? What you're interested in should be this." Zhang Shang didn't answer Jian Wushuang but instead looked at the flower demon. She revealed the Wanlu totem on her back. The originally unremarkable totem suddenly burst into a bright light due to the flower demon's presence. The flower demon glanced at it and instantly her eyes turned pitch black, blinding her. "Ah!" Her painful wails echoed throughout the entire palace. Jian Wushuang and Xiangyang were both stunned. With just one glance, the flower demon had been reduced to this state. Zhang Shang was also somewhat surprised. She merely wanted to know why the other party was interested in the totem on her back. The totem depicted a willow tree, considered a spirit of plants, which was why she asked. But she didn't expect it would blind the flower demon's eyes. Jian Wushuang hadn't anticipated that the Wanlu divine totem would have such an effect. Xiangyang, however, felt that the moment the bright light burst out, it contained the aura of Xinglua. After a moment of shock, Jian Wushuang reacted quickly, immediately launching a sword attack on the flower demon. Don't just stand there. Strike while she's down. I'll help you. Xiangyang also drew his sword and charged. The two of them began hacking at the flower demon's spreading vines. Blood splattered everywhere. Jiang Shang formed a hand seal, utilizing a unique technique that surrounded her with a green aura. She was in the innate stage, unable to let her aura leak out, yet she managed to encircle herself with it. She leapt forward, striking the flower demon on the chest with a palm, delivering the fatal blow. The flower demon was still in the innate stage, not yet possessing mental power strong enough to sense opponents without her eyes. This allowed the three of them to easily kill the flower demon. They had expected a fierce battle, but were surprised by how effortlessly they resolved the situation. At this moment, the sound of hurried footsteps came from outside. Then, a voice was heard. Yu Wenqing, reporting to capture the assassins. I request His Majesty to open the door. Inside the hall, Xiangyang cracked his neck, ready to open the door and kill his way out. But Jian Wushuang stopped him. Killing their way out would be easy, but there was no need for that. Jiang Shang was still the emperor of the Jiang kingdom. No need to throw caution to the wind. Let him in first. Jiang Shang sat on the dragon throne, her tone somber. Jian Wushuang gestured for Xiangyang to open the door. Click. The hall doors opened. Yu Wenqing, wielding a halberd, charged in with the imperial guards. He paid no attention to Xiangyang or Jian Wushuang. He looked at Jiang Shang. The corpse of the Long Princess was still on the ground. He didn't spare it a glance. At this moment, Yu Wenqing's expression was very complicated. He stared at Jiang Shang for a long time before speaking. Your Majesty, the assassin you mentioned, could it be me? Jiang Shang looked at Yu Wenqing, who was kneeling on one knee. She knew the great situation of the Jiang kingdom had long vanished. It was evident from today's plan. Even the Prime Minister had betrayed her. It should be known that it was the Prime Minister who personally appointed the defense against the invading army of Yu in Langshan County. Now even her close confidant, Li Mi, was dead. She had truly become a solitary ruler. This Jiang kingdom had nothing left to hold on to. Yu Wenqing, kneeling on the ground, suddenly raised his head and glanced at Jian Wushuang and Xiangyang. It must be my poor eyesight. His eyesight failed him, but Jian Wushuang and Xiangyang's eyes were fine. Outside the hall, thousands of elite imperial guards had gathered. With just one order under the pretense of capturing an assassin, they could flatten this hall. This was outright rebellion. Originally, Jian Wushuang and Xiangyang were prepared to fight their way out, but after hearing this, they paused. Jiang Shang did the same. She had been an emperor for several years, and it was impossible for her to be completely ignorant. She had previously glimpsed the Prime Minister's wolfish ambition but couldn't suppress it. Initially, Li Mi helped her, but now Li Mi was dead, and the Prime Minister had taken complete control, directly forcing the palace. Yet, at this moment, Yu Wenqing unexpectedly held back. He actually turned and walked away. Jiang Shang was somewhat surprised but said nothing. At the threshold, Yu Wenqing paused again, speaking indifferently. The wind is strong tonight. Your Majesty should be careful. With that, he walked out of the hall. The imperial guards withdrew as well. Jian Wushuang and Xiangyang finally breathed a sigh of relief. Let's go. Jiang Shang sat wearily on the dragon throne, ultimately unable to protect the great enterprise of the Jiang kingdom. Such a decisive departure pleased Jian Wushuang. If they stayed in Jiang kingdom, it would not be conducive to their cultivation. Jiang Shang leaving voluntarily was undoubtedly for the best. Wait a moment. Jian Wushuang licked his lips and walked toward the transformed, bloodied flower demon. Beneath the opponent's red clothes was a dark green token. A string of ancient characters was inscribed on it, and upon seeing the words, Jian Wushuang's brow furrowed. At this time, Xiangyang leaned in and asked, "What's wrong?" "Nothing, just an ancient token. We should go first." Jian Wushuang pocketed the token, looked up at Jiang Shang, and asked, "Where are we going?" "The eastern land, Great Tang." Xianxia's eyes were filled with longing. Jian Wushuang had once told her that the place where the Wanlu totem was discovered was in the East Sea. Before her mother left, she also mentioned the Eastern Land. She had been thinking about when to visit the Eastern Land of Great Tang. Whether for her own cultivation or to search for her mother. She had to go. Hearing the destination, Jian Wushuang was delighted. Nodding quickly, "All right, I'll go prepare." To head to Great Tang, they naturally needed to travel by ship. They couldn't fly through the air yet. Jiang Shang raised her hand, resolutely saying, "No need to prepare. Let's go together." She had made up her mind to abandon the Jiang Kingdom. Or rather, the Jiang Kingdom had abandoned her. At the same time, within the palace, the Prime Minister, Yuan Du, personally reported that the army in the city had already cleansed all dissenters and had come to the palace to meet with him. "Chang'er, have you captured the young emperor?" Yu Wenqing knelt on one knee and said without reservation, "I am a minister of His Majesty. How could I have treasonous intentions?" "Eh?" Yuan Du was immediately furious upon hearing these words and said, "Do you know what you are saying?" He knew that ever since he discovered Jiang Shang was a woman, his son had been infatuated with her. He never expected this infatuation to hinder his grand plan. After snorting coldly in frustration, Yuan Du personally led the soldiers to the harem. However, by this time, Jiang Shang and Jian Wushuang had already left the royal city. They headed eastward. Following the canal, they traveled all the way to Shijiaku. After several days of traveling, they arrived at Shijiaku, where the treasure ship to the sea was ready. Standing at the bow, Jian Wushuang did not disembark to bid farewell. He only wrote 2 letters, which he handed over to Wang Luan and iron-faced Liangchen. In these few days, the entire Jiang Kingdom had descended into chaos. The royal city experienced a sudden shift overnight. Prime Minister Yuan Du had someone impersonate Jiang Shang, then remotely controlled the entire court. Unfortunately, the Wolf Mountain County was no longer able to hold. Little Liang Wang had defeated the army of Wolf Mountain County. Now, only the coastal guards remained on the right flank, but they were not moving. This was because they had received news from Jian Wushuang. There was no need to resist any longer. Although he was leaving, he would not harm those people. It would be best if they could find a good future, but even if not, retreating to Coastal County and relying on the canal would not make life too difficult. After taking care of these matters, Jian Wushuang personally steered the treasure ship with Jiang Shang and Xianxia, heading out to sea. Their steps had already surpassed the mundane world behind them. They had one foot in the world of cultivation. Months later, on the deep blue sea, a treasure ship 10 zhang high was sailing slowly. Originally, there were only 3 people on the treasure ship, but now there were over 100 crew members. They worked in an orderly manner, taking advantage of the good weather to clean the deck. Some were cooking, fishing, and sailing below the deck. However, Jian Wushuang and the other 2 hadn't been on the deck for a month. At this moment, on the deck, a middle-aged man with one ear was directing a few new crew members to clean the deck. "Move faster. Don't think I saved you out of the goodness of my heart. Let me tell you, until the ship docks, your lives are mine. Do what I tell you and don't argue with me." This man was One Ear. He wore a cool vest, sat on a high platform on the deck, leisurely sipping tea, watching the crew work below. Originally, before going to sea, Jian Wushuang had not intended to take One Ear along. However, this guy insisted on coming along. He thought Jian Wushuang was fleeing, but that was not the case. After a month at sea, he realized the ship barely had enough food, and there were no treasures. Only then did he realize he had followed the wrong person. And Jian Wushuang and the other 2 had gone into seclusion. Being immortal, he still needed to eat. He also had to steer the ship. After eating fish for a month, he finally saw a small island, where he went to procure fresh water and food, and recruited a group of crew members, stabilizing the situation. Later, he rescued a group of shipwrecked sailors at sea, and life gradually improved. He even started to enjoy this lifestyle. Just as he was feeling comfortable, a sailor on the deck suddenly dropped his rag, pointed at the sea and said, "Look, we've reached the Great Tang." Splash! One Ear put down his teacup and stood up. In the distance across the sea, a continuous coastline had already appeared in front of them. There lay the Great Tang. One Ear was momentarily dazed, then immediately rushed from the deck to the cabin. Earlier, Jian Wushuang had instructed him to remind the three of them as soon as they reached the Great Tang. Bursting into the cabin, One Ear arrived at the bottommost level with 3 hidden rooms and banged on the door. "Masters, we've reached the Great Tang." In the Great Tang, the most notable place in the North Sea. This was the famous Shanhai County of the Great Tang. As the name suggests, it had both mountains and sea. The county city lay within the mountains, while the sea was beyond them. As a result, most of the coastline was deserted. There were only a few small docks scattered around. These docks were built by nearby fishing villages. However, one of these docks had recently become bustling due to the turmoil in the southern 7 nations. It even attracted many nobles from within the county city. This was because the merchant ships sailing from the southern 7 nations carried large quantities of gold, silver, and jewels. However, transporting these treasures was always troublesome, and arriving in a foreign land like the Great Tang could invite even more trouble. Thus, as soon as the merchant ships docked, they would sell off the treasures that were inconvenient to carry at low prices to the nobles of the Great Tang, who would ensure their safety and escort the people from the ships to the county city. This was essentially a form of under-the-table transaction. The place for these transactions, a place for bargains, was right beside the dock. Countless treasures were moved from the merchant ships, and most were sold cheaply. Aside from the readily usable gold and silver, the rest were sold to the county city nobles, with even the ships themselves being sold. Some merchants even sold their maidservants to these nobles. After all, with the silver notes from the Great Tang, they could still buy some local maidservants. Typically, these transactions were conducted by the frivolous young nobles. To the south of the dock was a military town, and after transactions, soldiers would personally escort these self-proclaimed envoys from the fallen southern nations. Such a seamless operation was common, but this kind of incredibly profitable trade was rare. As soon as a merchant ship docked, a group of people would immediately approach to discuss business. At this moment, beside the dock, a group of workers was busy, unloading various boxes from a merchant ship. The boxes naturally contained treasures that were inconvenient to carry, such as paintings, antiques, artifacts, tea leaves, and silk. In fact, the Great Tang dynasty didn't lack these things. It was all about getting a bargain. They bought these items only to resell them quickly. "Young lady, please make way." Amidst the bustling crowd stood a young woman dressed in rough clothing. She didn't mind the smell of sweat from the laborers, standing on the dock's deck, her eyes gazing out at the calm sea, as if waiting for someone. When others spoke to her, she didn't reply but silently stepped aside. Her presence was quite abrupt in the crowd. Yet no one found it strange because she had been at this dock for 3 years, almost every day standing on the deck, her eyes always fixed on the sea. Therefore, everyone nearby recognized her. As people passed by, they would joke, "Ah Z, are you still waiting for that young man of yours? I advise you to stop waiting. He's probably found another girl in Tian City. You should just go home. Come on, what do you know? This is what we call unrequited love." The group of porters teased her one after another. The young woman named Aziz didn't mind at all and didn't even bother to argue. But deep down, she was convinced that he would definitely come back. And he would marry her, so she didn't care what others said. Otherwise, she wouldn't have waited for 3 years. To others, she seemed foolish. But no one knew how kind he was to her back then. So she was willing to wait, even if it meant waiting until the seas dried up and the rocks crumbled. Buzz! At that moment, a loud horn sounded from the sea. It was from a merchant ship about to dock. The sound signaled that it was approaching the pier. After the horn, the pier naturally had to respond. A worker on the lookout tower shouted down, "We have a big one coming in. It's a treasure ship from the southern 7 kingdoms, at least 70 zhang long. My heavens! There must be someone important on board." This shout immediately attracted the attention of the dignitaries and aristocrats from the city of Shanhai County. They craned their necks to look toward the sea and saw the enormous treasure ship. Each of them was excitedly rubbing their hands, ready to negotiate a big deal once the ship docked. This was all money to them. Before long, the ship docked, but the deck of the treasure ship was too high, so they had to lower a ladder. The crowd below eagerly awaited. But what came down was a ragged old man, who looked worse than a beggar on the street. The boatman was also taken aback when he came down. He was from the southern 7 kingdoms and had never been to the Tang dynasty. He thought the Tang people were very hospitable, which made him feel a bit embarrassed. He looked up and shouted to the ship, "Helmsman, come down. These people mean no harm. I can see that." A person on the deck looked down. It was One Ear who was following Jian Wushuang. He glanced at the people on the pier and then turned back to Jian Wushuang with a fawning smile. "Master, why don't we disembark here? These people seem quite hospitable and mean no harm. Let's go down and take a look." Jian Wushuang gestured for One Ear to lead the way down first. Then he looked at Xianxia and Xianxia behind him. The 3 of them had been in seclusion. Now they had all reached the level of great completion in the innate realm. Especially Xianxia, who was just a hair's breadth away from forming his golden core. This was all due to his careful guidance. In his previous life, she was his master Hui Qing. But this time it was Jian Wushuang's turn to teach her. If Xianxia regained his memories and became Xianxia, who knows what he would think. After One Ear went down, he conversed with some locals and then returned to the deck to report. "Master, I found out that this is Shanhai County of the Tang Dynasty, and it's quite far from Taiyan City." Jian Wushuang said calmly, "Then let's rest here for a few days before moving on." Before coming here, he had already familiarized himself with the map of the Tang Dynasty. Shanhai County was quite far from Taiyan City, at least 10,000 miles away. Traveling by land would take more than a month and the journey would be exhausting, affecting their cultivation. Traveling by sea was much more convenient. They only needed to switch to a smaller merchant ship and sail along the canal inland. So Jian Wushuang decided to stay locally for a few days to gather information about the Tang Dynasty. He knew very little about this powerful dynasty. All he knew was that there were 36 counties in the north and south. It was culturally prosperous. Neighboring mundane kingdoms highly revered the Tang Dynasty. He knew nothing more, especially regarding matters concerning cultivators. Once everyone disembarked, the merchants who had come to do business left disappointed after realizing there were no treasures on the ship. Some particularly wanton young nobles, however, were interested in buying the treasure ship. Such a massive treasure ship was rare even in the Tang Dynasty. Although Shanhai County was by the sea, it was remote, and no one had the capability to build such a large treasure ship. Now, seeing this slightly damaged treasure ship, they all wanted to buy it from Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang was indeed considering selling it, but did not rush to do so. He had One Ear send the people away and then headed toward the small town by the pier. There were crew members on board to keep watch, so there was nothing to worry about. Jian Wushuang had only taken a few steps when he suddenly frowned. He turned to look at the lady in linen clothes on the deck. With just a glance, his pupils constricted slightly. A strange aura seemed to have appeared on the girl. However, it disappeared in an instant. That aura was not familiar, but it was related to his psyche power. Ever since he embarked on the path of cultivation, his psyche power had expanded greatly. Now, he could already detect everything within a 5-kilometer radius, especially his sensitivity to aura. Just now, he felt a sense of oppression from that girl. It was a wonderful feeling. Many people had given him this kind of pressure in the past, so it was both familiar and unfamiliar. What was familiar was the feeling, but what was unfamiliar was the aura. However, after he took a look at the other party's appearance and used his thought power to investigate, the aura disappeared again. This was very strange. Seeing that he stood rooted to the spot, One Ear followed his gaze and looked at the lady in hemp clothes, its eyes darting around. "What's wrong?" Xianxia was curious. Jian Wushuang shook his head and said, "Nothing. I haven't been on land for a long time. I'm not used to it. Let's find a place to stay first." "All right. I'll go ahead and scout the way." One Ear said as he ran towards the town. When Jian Wushuang and the others arrived at the town, One Ear had already arranged the rooms. Jian Wushuang was very satisfied. When she entered the room, she nodded at him meaningfully. This confirmed One Ear's guess. After settling Jian Wushuang down, he returned to the dock with his subordinates. Jian Wushuang went into the room to wash up. Thus, he summoned Xianxia over to chat about his experiences in cultivation. He had been in seclusion for more than a month. Now they had all condensed their aura into their dantians. It was urgent to form their golden cores. However, in order to form a golden core, apart from cultivating in seclusion, he also needed the assistance of treasures. Law, wealth, and land were indispensable. They already had the cultivation method. They could snatch wealth, but they didn't need a cultivation partner for the time being. Land was crucial. Even if they had experience in cultivation, they couldn't block the dense aura. Xiangyang thought for a moment and said, "The Thunder Temple of the Tang Empire is a treasure land. It's said that Xianxian often appear. I guess they are golden core stage self-cultivators. As for this auxiliary treasure, we have to go to the world's first tower of the Tang Empire to find out. World's first pavilion. It was not a restaurant, but an organization that gathered information from all over the world. Even Xianxian frequented this place. Thus, many mortals who dreamed of entering the world of cultivation yearned for the Great Tang, the Paramount World, and the Celestial Sect. It was the same for Jian Wushuang and the others. I once heard my mother say that outside Great Peace City in the Great Tang, there is a Baoguang temple that worships a true immortal." Jiang Shang's words stunned Jian Wushuang. He really didn't know about this. He gave Xiangyang a look, but Xiangyang didn't say anything either. Clearly, he didn't know either. Jian Wushuang coughed dryly and said indifferently, "There is such a thing. As you know, there are many exalted immortals in the Tang Empire. Some of them are willing to guard the human world, such as the monk in Thunder Sound Temple. Senior, do you know that true immortal?" When Jiang Shang heard this, his interest was piqued. Jian Wushuang, who had also come to the Tang Empire for the first time, could only vaguely say that he had heard of the so-called genuine immortals a few times. After chatting with the two of them for a while, the three of them returned to their rooms. Jian Wushuang began to think about their respective benefits. Now he had to follow Jiang Shang's lead and assist him to become a super expert. And he had the potential. He only needed his guidance. The first step was to enter the cultivation world. At the moment, they were at most itinerant cultivators and could not achieve anything. Heading to Great Peace City became the most important matter. Jian Wushuang was thinking about the Great Tang and wanted to find an ear to ask about the situation in Great Peace City, so that he wouldn't have to travel in a bad light. However, before he could find an ear, the other party covered his eyes and came to him. "This is what happened?" Jian Wushuang stared at One Ear in surprise. His head was swollen like a pig's. If Jian Wushuang didn't have psyche power to detect his aura, he wouldn't have recognized him. One Ear covered his left eye and said in grievance, "You don't know. I just returned to the dock and saw a few rich playboys bullying a weak woman. I went up to stop them. Who knew that they would punch and kick me? I almost killed them." Jian Wushuang narrowed his eyes and looked at One Ear thoughtfully. What kind of person was One Ear? How could he do such a stupid thing? He even got beaten up for nothing. There were definitely some things that couldn't be said. "Is it the girl who was at the dock earlier?" he asked directly. Yes, yes." One Ear nodded repeatedly. Jian Wushuang sighed and said, "Well, you don't have to worry about this matter anymore. Find a doctor to bandage your wound. We won't stay here for a few days." After sending One Ear away, he closed the door and walked to the windowsill, looking at the dock. Although he was a few thousand feet away, after reaching the Khanate realm, his eyes and ears were completely different. He could even see things thousands of feet away clearly. There is indeed a problem. Jian Wushuang looked at it. They weren't looking at bullies. It was the fluctuating aura. That aura was hidden on the woman's body. Or rather, it was the aura that he had been contaminated with. It did not belong to that woman. The reason why he had stopped earlier was because he was a little suspicious But he was also worried that the other party was related to the local self-cultivators. It was better to avoid trouble. He didn't have any intention of attacking the other party. But now, he saw a group of mortal playboys bullying this woman at will. There was probably no cultivator behind her. She was just a lucky mortal woman. Jian Wushuang was lucky to have met such a benefactor. He immediately left the room and called out to One Ear, who hadn't gone far. "Wait a moment. Call your men and follow me to meet those rich playboys." Jian Wushuang's words irritated One Ear and he immediately agreed. He called a few experts and prepared to get back at them. Zhang Shang did not know about this, but the busybody Xianxia also came over. The group of people went straight to the dock. Jian Wushuang had planned to go alone, but now that the woman was being pestered, it would be suspicious if he went alone and beat away so many people. It was better to take the opportunity to find trouble with the other party and save an ignorant girl. At that time, even if the other party had a cultivator behind him, he would not be able to find any fault. Arriving at the dock, Jian Wushuang waved his hand and One Ear stood up immediately. But before he could say anything, he heard One Ear laugh. "Io, you one-eared guy. Do you really not understand words? I told you to scram. Did you get lost?" The young master at the head of the group stepped forward, intending to grab One Ear's ear. This time there were many of them, but One Ear was not about to be caught without a fight. He lifted his foot and kicked out, sending the young master sprawling to the ground. "Earlier, it was just because you had more people. Did you really think you could bully me?" One Ear cursed as he kicked the young master a couple more times. The other young masters wanted to intervene but were stopped by several boatmen. Seeing that Jian Wushuang had more people, the young master who had been kicked was smart enough to get up, dust off his clothes and said arrogantly, "Fine, you have more people now. Just you wait. Wait, we will. Whoever doesn't come is a grandson." One Ear retorted, not backing down. Who were they? They were the ones who had played a significant role in the rebellion against the Jiang kingdom. How could they be bullied by a local ruffian? Unfortunately, they hadn't considered that even a powerful dragon can't suppress a local snake. Jian Wushuang seemed to have forgotten this saying and didn't take the threat seriously, which led to a major mistake later on. They drove away that group of spoiled young masters. The linen-clad young lady who had been harassed quickly bowed to thank Jian Wushuang and the others. "It was nothing. No need to be so polite." Jian Wushuang waved his hand and then asked, "Miss, are you a local?" "Yes, my family lives in the fishing village to the east." The linen-clad girl replied softly with her head down. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang curiously asked, "Then you must be waiting for your family's fishing boat. Do you know if there are any routes nearby that lead to Tian City?" After asking, he regretted it a bit. No matter how he looked at it, the other person was a weak girl who had never seen the world. How would she know about navigation routes? To his surprise, she did know. Especially when she heard they were going to Tian City. Her eyes were filled with longing. It was the same kind of look people from Jiang Kingdom had when they longed for the Tang Empire. "You are going to Tian City? If you go by sea, you need to bypass Dongshan Island and enter the inland canal, which will take about a month." The linen-clad girl explained the route to Tian City skillfully, as if she had calculated it countless times in her mind. Jian Wushuang paused for a moment and then said truthfully, "Thank you for telling us. One Ear, give this young lady some silver as a token of appreciation." Seeing this, One Ear took out 2 silver ingots from his pocket, totaling 20 taels, which was a huge sum for ordinary fishermen. However, the linen-clad girl repeatedly declined, saying, No, I don't want the money. I just want to ask you benefactors to inquire about someone for me when you reach Tian City. If you find him, just give him a message." "Oh!" Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered, thinking that she was indeed not simple. Perhaps that person was related to the aura she carried, so he agreed immediately. "No problem. Just tell me his address and name." The linen-clad girl hesitated and said, "I don't know where he lives. I only know his name, but he should be very famous, and the people of Tian City might all know him." This amused Xiangyang, who said with a smile, "Miss, Tian City has a population of over 10 million. Are you sure the person you mentioned is so famous that the entire city would know him? Is he the Emperor of Tang? Everyone burst into laughter upon hearing those words. Jian Wushuang couldn't help but glare at them. This finally silenced them. 10 million people? The woman in a hemp robe seemed a bit dazed. Perhaps she didn't even know how many 10 million was or what it represented. But she still argued, even if not everyone, at least half the people should know him. What's his name? Jian Wushuang's eyes were burning with curiosity. Chun Yuan. His name is Chun Yuan, and he's a scholar. If you ever encounter him, please help me deliver this letter to him. After speaking, the woman in the hemp robe took out a letter wrapped in hemp oil paper from her sleeve. Jian Wushuang reached out to take it. As soon as he touched it, he saw the contents of the envelope, and for a moment, he was at a loss for words, feeling both curious and surprised. All right, once I reach Tian City, I will definitely deliver the letter for you. Thank you so much. The woman in the hemp robe bowed deeply to everyone. After bidding farewell to the group, she returned to the ship's deck, gazing alone at the calm sea. By then, everything on the merchant ship had been unloaded, and the dock was empty. The setting sun fell, and the sea looked like a sea of fire. A solitary figure stood amidst it, looking rather desolate. Jian Wushuang only took one glance before leading his people back to the inn. Returning to the inn, he didn't disturb Jiangshang or inform Xianxia. Instead, he quietly left the inn by the window under the cover of night. In the darkness, Jian Wushuang moved like a ghost. Although he couldn't yet walk on air, he covered 3 feet with each step, moving with great speed. Still hasn't gone back? He was surprised to see that the figure was still standing at the dock. From when they left until now, 2 hours had passed. Could it be a deep infatuation? Forget it. I'll go take a look myself. Jian Wushuang initially intended to follow the woman in the hemp robe and visit her fishing village. Perhaps he could find the source of the aura. The fishing village was not far from the dock, only 3 to 5 miles away, and Jian Wushuang reached it in less than the time it takes to burn a stick of incense. The village was quiet at night with few lights. It was very silent. Even the wild dogs in the village made no sound. Walking down the silent street, Jian Wushuang expanded his mental power, carefully searching every corner nearby. When he reached a small courtyard, he stopped. In this courtyard was the aura of the woman in the hemp robe. This must have been her residence. But there was no one there at the moment. The courtyard gate was merely a fence made of several wooden boards. He jumped into the yard. Although the courtyard was rather modest, it was very clean. The aura is in the well? Jian Wushuang's expression changed as he walked toward the well in the courtyard. As he approached, the aura became faintly visible, similar to the aura on the woman in the hemp robe. He looked down the well, which seemed no different from an ordinary well, dark and unclear. But the aura flickered, sometimes strong, sometimes weak, just like the ripples on the water's surface. It seems I need to go down and take a look. Since no one was in the courtyard, and the woman in the hemp robe probably wouldn't return for a while, even if she did, he could easily avoid her. Moreover, she was just an ordinary person, posing no threat to him. He descended into the well. Supporting himself with his feet, he descended step by step. The well opening was narrow, but it widened as he went down. Jian Wushuang could no longer support himself with his legs and had to cling to the stone wall, using his fingers to grip the crevices and cautiously explore downward. It was with great difficulty that he reached the water's surface, only for that aura to suddenly disappear again. Feeling somewhat unwilling to give up, he immediately jumped back into the water. Only then did he realize that the space below the surface was much larger, more like an underground lake, with the wellhead above merely serving as a cover. Whoosh! Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and then dove directly into the water. Although it was pitch black underwater, he could still observe everything around him with his thought power. The water was very clear, and as he continued to dive deeper, he could feel the surrounding silence, with not even the sound of flowing water. Yet, such clear water didn't seem like stagnant water. Moreover, after he reached the bottom, he no longer sensed that aura. Could it be that the aura is a living creature? That was very likely. It might be some kind of mountain spirit or earth essence. Being close to the sea, there were indeed many spiritual creatures in the ocean. However, theoretically, being so near the mundane world, these spiritual creatures rarely came ashore. Just as he was puzzled, the aura suddenly appeared again. Before Jian Wushuang could feel happy, he sensed a tremor in the water, and a massive stone detached from the rock wall, hurtling toward his position. Sure enough, it's a living creature. Jian Wushuang kicked off with his foot, swiftly moving away to dodge the falling boulder. The water became turbid in an instant, but Jian Wushuang didn't rely on his eyes. Instead, he locked onto the opponent using his thought power. A scene immediately appeared in his mind. It was a gigantic jellyfish. Every time it contracted its body, the aura would fluctuate between strong and weak. This was why he could sometimes sense it and sometimes not. The problem wasn't with the jellyfish itself, but with something residing on it. Jian Wushuang acted swiftly, capturing the position of the creature and darting toward it. He didn't use any weapons. Instead, he grabbed the jellyfish's twitching tentacles with both hands, pulling it toward himself. Only at such close range did he finally see the object on the creature. No wonder, it actually swallowed this thing. Jian Wushuang crushed the jellyfish's massive head with a flick of his hand, retrieving a piece of coral from it. Above it lingered a dense spiritual energy, a treasure. This was a spiritual entity from the seabed. In fact, the jellyfish's true form was this piece of coral. Now, having lost its host, the coral became an inanimate object, but the spiritual energy above could aid Jian Wushuang. With this coral, he could ascend to the rank of Immortal alongside Xianxia and others, reaching the golden core stage. I didn't expect to be so lucky this time. It seems the Tang dynasty is indeed my blessed land. Having found the source of the aura, there was no need for him to stay underwater, so he prepared to leave. However, just as he emerged to the surface, he heard a clamor of footsteps. Clearly, it came from above. In no time, a glow from torches illuminated the area. Someone had arrived at the small courtyard with torches in hand. Jian Wushuang, with a thought, dove back into the water. There are cultivators? Moreover, they were heading directly here. If he could sense the aura on the linen-clad woman, other cultivators likely could too. Of course, the opponent had to be of a much higher realm than him. At the very least, they were golden core stage cultivators. Just as his thought power stirred, he detected a powerful aura above, undoubtedly from a golden core stage cultivator. Fortunately, his reaction was swift. He wrapped his entire body in thought power, suppressing his aura to the minimum while in the water. Along with that piece of coral, he carefully protected it. At this moment, within the small courtyard, a group of mysterious figures dressed in black soft armor were searching every corner of the yard recklessly. Among them, an old man stood at the center of the courtyard, using his mental power to probe the surroundings. His triangular eyes and sharp, hooked nose gave him a naturally imposing presence. Expand the search area. Check within a 3-mile radius. Bring everyone here to me and interrogate them thoroughly. Yes. The group in black soft armor were all innate experts, moving with incredible speed. In just 1 hour, they had gathered all the people from the fishing village, with the houses consumed by flames. In the distance, the pier remained eerily silent, with no one daring to glance over. Left Protector, we've searched everywhere and still found nothing, a black-clad man reported anxiously. The old man with triangular eyes remained calm, extending his skeletal claw-like hand to play with a pair of iron balls, saying sinisterly, "We arrived too late." He then turned around and left without hesitation. The black-armored men followed suit, leaving the villagers weak and silent on the ground. This group came and left swiftly, with no one knowing where they came from. However, Jian Wushuang, lurking at the bottom of the well, heard the words, "Left Protector." Someone referred to as Protector was certainly not from an ordinary organization. They were likely from a sect or a cult. Jian Wushuang became extremely cautious, waiting until dawn before climbing out of the well. As he emerged, it began to rain heavily outside. The burnt-out houses were extinguished, reduced to charred remains. Jian Wushuang walked through the mud, with rainwater mixed with blood beneath his feet. The stench of blood was overwhelming. When he reached the entrance of the fishing village, he saw the slain villagers. They died silently, but each had a bowl-sized hole in their chests. Their hearts are gone? Jian Wushuang glanced at the gruesome scene and could only sigh helplessly. He hadn't expected to encounter such a thing right after arriving in the Tang dynasty. The cultivators who came yesterday not only sought the coral but also took the hearts of everyone in the village. This was undoubtedly the work of a demonic cult. Time to go! Jian Wushuang had only one thought now, which was to leave quickly. If those people hadn't gone far and decided to return, it would be troublesome. At present, his strength was not enough to contend with those people. Returning to the inn, he took off his soaked clothes and changed into dry ones. Just as he did, there was a knock on the door. "Come in," Jian Wushuang said calmly. The door opened, and Xianxia entered, politely saying, "I'm sorry to disturb you so early, senior." "It's fine. I just got up too," Jian Wushuang replied casually and continued, "By the way, pack up. We're taking the water route to Taiyan City today." "Okay." Xiangxia's face lit up with excitement. She hadn't planned to stay in such a small place for long, so much so that she forgot why she came to find Jian Wushuang in the first place. As she informed everyone to pack their luggage, Xiangyang approached mysteriously and whispered, "Did you feel an evil aura last night?" "You sensed it too?" Jian Wushuang asked, surprised. After entering the Tang dynasty, he had Jiangxiang and Xiangyang conceal their auras. This turtle-breathing technique was easy to create, not particularly difficult. Fortunately, he was cautious. Otherwise, the demonic cultivators would have discovered Jiangxiang and Xiangyang yesterday. Xiangyang nodded and replied, "That aura came crashing from the sea without any restraint. Even a deaf person could sense it." "Keep your voice down." Jian Wushuang frowned slightly, glanced out the window and asked, "How did you know they came from the sea?" "To be honest, yesterday I saw you sneaking away, and I couldn't sleep all night. I kept watch outside. After you left for about an hour, a black mist came from the sea, filled with an evil aura. I don't know how many people there were, but the leader was definitely a cultivator in the golden core stage." Jian Wushuang was surprised, not because Xiangyang discovered that the group came from the sea, but because Xiangyang had been watching him all along. This made him somewhat displeased. He frowned and said, "Why are you watching me so closely? I was afraid you might run away." Xiangyang said, somewhat aggrieved, "To be honest, you've always been guarded against me. You haven't even given me the complete cultivation method. If I don't keep an eye on you, what if one day you find me useless and run off with Jiangxiang?" Since Xiangyang had embarked on the path of cultivation again, his mind had become more active. He increasingly felt that his presence or absence didn't seem to make much difference to Jian Wushuang, so he began to worry that Jian Wushuang might abandon him one day. "You're overthinking it." Jian Wushuang patted Xiangyang on the shoulder. He didn't explain further because some things couldn't be told to him, but he would involve him in the plans. For instance, the Wanlu divine tree on Jiangxiang's back seemed unrelated to Xiangyang, but it was actually significant. The aura of Wanlu divine wood was on Xinglua, and it might be possible to use Xiangyang's identity to transmit it to Xinglua and lure him out. Their cultivation speed was still too slow. If Xinglua were willing to take them, Jian Wushuang would regain his immortality within 100 years. The immortality referred to here was not the immortals of the mortal world, but the immortal of derivation. After leaving Xiangyang, Jian Wushuang found one ear. He instructed him to prepare supplies for the ship, buying as much as possible. After all, they would soon reach the inland of the Great Tang, so there was no need to bring much. Once the instructions were given, the others had almost finished packing. They left the inn together. The rain outside was getting heavier. Everyone held oiled paper umbrellas, but their clothes still got wet. When they reached the dock, they found that there were still many people there. They stood at the dock in the heavy rain, not knowing what they were doing. When Jian Wushuang and the others approached, they heard cries of sorrow. Pushing through the crowd, they walked to the dock's deck and discovered an elderly couple crying over the corpse of a woman in coarse clothes. The elderly couple had gone fishing at sea yesterday and returned to the dock in the morning, only to find their daughter's corpse lying on the deck. Jian Wushuang was not surprised. The demonic cultivator had followed the woman in coarse clothes to the fishing village yesterday. It wasn't surprising that she was dead now. However, Jian Wushuang still felt a bit regretful. Listening to the old man's repeated calls of his daughter's name, Jian Wushuang learned that the woman's name was Azzi. After noting it down, he boarded the ship without looking back. After One Ear brought the supplies on board, Jian Wushuang asked him to bring Azzi's parents onto the ship as well. The fishing village was gone. The elderly couple probably had no place to stay anymore, which was truly pitiful. Moreover, since Jian Wushuang had obtained the coral from their well, he felt he had fulfilled a karmic bond. The treasure ship set sail once more. After reaching the straits of the Shanhai County, they began heading towards the Grand Tang Canal. Along the way, Azzi's body was given a water burial. Jian Wushuang then began refining the coral. The spiritual energy above continued to dissipate, and he couldn't let it go to waste. Unfortunately, he only had the coral at the moment and no alchemy furnace. Otherwise, he could have refined a batch of pills. Now he could only refine the spiritual energy from the coral, which was quite polite. Fortunately, the spiritual energy was abundant, enough for the three of them to absorb. The three surrounded the coral and began their attempt to break through to the golden core stage. They paid no heed to the outside world. It was unknown how much time had passed when the treasure ship stopped, but Jian Wushuang and the other two were still in closed-door cultivation, and no one dared disturb them, so the ship remained stationary. In the blink of an eye, half a year had passed. The treasure ship turned back, but three people disembarked. It was Jian Wushuang and the other two. They were now very close to Tian City. Jian Wushuang dismissed One Ear and the others, as it was not suitable to bring a group of ordinary people while seeking opportunities to enter the cultivation world. Therefore, he gave the ship to One Ear, telling him to live well in the Great Tang. As for the three of them, they bought 3 fast horses and headed straight for Tian City. They traveled 600 miles in a day. By nightfall, they were still in the wilderness. They thought of finding a small town to rest for the night. However, when they entered a village, they found it eerily silent. There was also a stench of decay. "It's a corpse." Xianxia frowned, walking into a courtyard and looking at the rotting corpse inside. His stomach churned, and he almost vomited on the spot. "Let's go. Find another place," Jian Wushuang said calmly. But they had already seen several villages like this. After 6 months in seclusion, they had all reached the golden core stage. Originally, they could have flown directly to Tian City, but to keep a low profile, they decided to enter Tian City as ordinary people. However, they hadn't expected to encounter such strange occurrences on the way. Some towns had even been slaughtered entirely. Corpses were piled together, with the same bowl-sized wound on their chests as Jian Wushuang had seen in the fishing village. It was clearly the work of the same group. They had removed the hearts of the ordinary people. The demonic cult is rampant, and not just rampant but extremely so. They were only 100 miles from the imperial city. Such things happened despite the fact that the emperor of the Great Tang could also cultivate and even had immortals under his command. Didn't he fear that one day the demonic cult might massacre Tian City? The three decided not to stop and rushed to the outskirts of Tian City overnight. There was a curfew at night, so when they reached the city gates, they couldn't enter. They had to wait until dawn to enter Tian City with the crowd. Xianxia, who was initially full of curiosity about the Great Tang, felt somewhat disappointed after the incidents on the way. Especially upon entering Tian City, she found it incredibly prosperous but did not see the grandeur she had expected. In this regard, Jian Wushuang and Xianxia were quite experienced. Seeing was believing. Besides, they had seen many large cities. In their view, the so-called flourishing Great Tang, boasted by ordinary people, was just that, a large city somewhat more prosperous. Ultimately, it could not escape its vulgarity. After entering the city, the three found a relatively bustling inn to stay in. Jian Wushuang did not rest for a moment. After a slight disguise, he headed straight for the first building under heaven. He initially planned to buy some information with gold and silver to understand the Great Tang. However, upon entering the first building under heaven, he realized he had come to the wrong place. The place was rumored to be magical, but it was just a marketplace bustling with ordinary people, exchanging goods from various places, a paradise for merchants. Jian Wushuang was quite disappointed. Just as he was about to leave, a maid blocked his way. "Young master, my boss invites you to the 3rd floor for tea." "Oh!" Jian Wushuang stopped in his tracks, and it was then that he dared to relax his mental focus, because his identity had already been exposed. Otherwise, the maid wouldn't have stopped him. He simply released his mental power and sensed multiple auras on the 2nd and 3rd floors above him. All of them were cultivators. Even the maid in front of him was an innate expert. Feigning calm, Jian Wushuang said, "Lead the way." He hadn't expected his cover to be blown so quickly. Moreover, he was already in the golden core stage, even if only at the initial stage, which made him akin to an immortal in the mortal world. He didn't expect to be recognized so easily in this first-floor establishment. Fortunately, since it was a place of business, they wouldn't inquire about his identity. However, Jian Wushuang faced another awkward issue. He was penniless. He didn't have the spiritual stones required in the cultivation world. But since he had been invited, he had no choice but to follow along. As he passed the 2nd floor, he noticed it was also bustling, though most were innate cultivators with some postnatal practitioners as well. There were only 1 or 2 in the golden core stage. On the 3rd floor, almost everyone was a golden core expert. Their attire was indistinguishable from that of ordinary people. Walking on the street, commoners wouldn't be able to tell the difference. At most, they might notice something unusual about their demeanor. In reality, the gap between those in the golden core stage and ordinary people wasn't vast. It was simply a matter of having condensed a force within their bodies, without altering their mortal form. "Senior, please feel free." The maid slightly bowed, escorting Jian Wushuang to the 3rd floor before descending. Jian Wushuang nodded and stepped onto the 3rd floor. The ceiling rose about 7 or 8 feet, with various rare fruits and hefty tomes displayed above. At the counter, many were discussing rare treasures with the shopkeeper. Jian Wushuang perked up his ears to listen. But when he heard about spiritual stones, his expression turned somber. He was utterly broke at the moment, so how could he afford anything? As a result, he didn't dare inquire about the purpose of certain treasures, only glancing at them briefly and paying no attention to the shopkeeper's quotes, merely nodding frequently. A young shopkeeper, very polite, said, "Senior, is this your first time in the Great Tang?" I just arrived in Tian City. I've long heard that this is the world's first establishment for collecting various treasures, so I came to have a look." Jian Wushuang spoke modestly. The young shopkeeper, smiling, replied, "Senior, you give our establishment too much credit. We merely trade in some ordinary treasures. I suspect many of them wouldn't even catch your eye." After exchanging some pleasantries, Jian Wushuang naturally engaged in casual conversation with the other party. Like other cultivators, he didn't really care about buying anything. His main purpose was to exchange information. For example, discussing some insights into cultivation, though these were mainly used to elicit more information. Jian Wushuang could see through the essence of these mundane cultivation methods at a glance, and his remarks left the other party quite astonished. The young shopkeeper, after hearing his insights, was thoroughly impressed and had an epiphany in his cultivation. "I am Zhu Quan, grateful for the senior's guidance." The young shopkeeper, Zhu Quan, bowed deeply. Although his strength was similar to Jian Wushuang's, both being in the early golden core stage, the insights Jian Wushuang shared warranted such respect. Jian Wushuang quickly raised his hand to stop him and said calmly, "It's just some insights. No need for such courtesy, my friend." "No, senior, your talent is exceptional. Although our strengths are similar, my understanding lags far behind. I should show my respect." Zhu Quan continued, "Such a talent as yours, senior, must have come to this first pavilion for the Emperor's edict issued by the Tang Emperor, right? Emperor's edict? Jian Wushuang frowned. He hadn't heard of this before, but since the other party mentioned it, it was clearly significant. He followed the lead and said, "I've only heard a little about it. I came to learn more." "Then you have found the right person, Senior. The Emperor's edict is still here in the first pavilion. I'll fetch it for you to see," Zhu Quan said, then slightly lifted off the ground to retrieve a decree from the highest shelf. Jian Wushuang slightly raised his head, searching his mind for information about the Emperor's edict. He hadn't heard of any edict issued by the Tang Emperor on his way. However, considering the mortals harmed by the demonic cult he encountered on the road, he thought it might be related. As he let his mind wander, Zhu Quan opened the Emperor's edict. Jian Wushuang, wanting to show respect, adopted a more solemn expression. "Actually, there's nothing much to see in this edict. It's just a handwritten decree by His Majesty, containing some Taoist artistic conception that ordinary people cannot perceive. Please have a look, Senior," Zhu Quan said as he pushed the edict toward him. Jian Wushuang obliged and commented, "The handwriting contains sword intent and an eternal quality that cannot wither. The writer must have surpassed the golden core stage." This statement wasn't flattery. The writer truly had this ability. The handwriting carried sword intent, which Jian Wushuang recognized at a glance. As for the Taoist principles Zhu Quan mentioned, that was pure nonsense. For Taoist principles to be embedded in handwriting, one would need at least the strength of the ancestor realm. Only a Tao ancestor could manipulate Taoist principles at will. A mere mortal dared to dabble in Taoist principles, that would be absurd. However, this emperor was indeed much stronger than them, having surpassed the golden core stage. In the mortal cultivation world, he could be considered a top expert. At least, he was a cultivator at the nascent soul stage. In Jian Wushuang's view, this mundane world was very peculiar because spiritual energy was absorbed by spiritual objects, and pure cultivation could only lead to consummate innate stage at best. Further progress required the aid of rare materials. Breaking through to the golden core stage was already difficult. Reaching the nascent soul stage was practically as hard as ascending to the heavens. As for the Tang Emperor, according to what he knew, he was still very young, and his cultivation time probably didn't exceed 20 years, yet he had already become a nascent soul stage cultivator. This also indicated that the Tang royal family had ample resources, and the Tang Emperor had a unique aptitude. Cultivators emerging from such harsh environments would be considered geniuses in the outside world, though they couldn't be compared to the descendants of those with powerful bloodlines. However, Jian Wushuang didn't expect that his casual remark about the Tang Emperor's strength would draw a peculiar look from Zhu Quan. Jian Wushuang didn't know if he had misspoken and thought perhaps he had inadvertently revealed a hidden strength of the Tang Emperor. Senior is indeed extraordinary. Just from the handwriting, you could deduce that the Tang Emperor surpassed the golden core stage. I am truly impressed. However, this is no secret. His Majesty surpassed the golden core stage 3 years ago. Otherwise, the Tang dynasty might have changed hands long ago, Zhu Quan said, seemingly reminiscing. In fact, he was about the same age as the Tang Emperor, belonging to those who had experienced that era. However, at that time he was only at the peak of the innate realm, and his breakthrough to the golden core stage was recent. On the other hand, Jian Wushuang's appearance was very youthful, looking only a little over 20, but he had an extraordinary aura, leading people to speculate that it was because he started cultivating early, allowing him to maintain his youthful appearance. However, Jian Wushuang's aura was very weak, not like that of a great cultivator in the golden core stage whose energy cyclone entered the sea. Yet, the vision and insights Jian Wushuang had just displayed still greatly impressed Zhu Quan. He thought that, if it were anyone else, they probably wouldn't have said so much. Realizing that Jian Wushuang was truly unfamiliar with the Tang dynasty, Zhu Quan began to talk about some major events that had occurred in the Tang dynasty in recent years. Senior might be from the southern sky cultivation world and may not know much about the East. It's actually nothing special. This Eastern cultivation world mainly revolves around 3 places: 1 temple, 1 law, and 1 tomb. Zhu Quan began first talking about the origin of the Tang dynasty. He also briefly summarized the current situation of the cultivation world. It was first divided into 4 major cultivation worlds. The Southern Sky World, which consisted of the 7 southern countries. Jian Wushuang actually didn't know about this either. Back in Jiang country, he hadn't been exposed to the cultivation world. Then there was the Eastern Land cultivation world, which was the Tang dynasty. In fact, in the human cultivation world, only the Eastern Land and the Southern Sky World were relatively prosperous. The other 2 worlds were different. One was the Northern Glacier, occupied by a group of demonic cultivators known as the Holy Sect. Very few cultivators ventured to the Northern Glacier. It was rumored that ancient demons were sealed there, and the Holy Sect was the legacy left by these ancient demons. This made Jian Wushuang very curious, but he did not ask about it. Planning to learn more in the future when he had time, he continued to listen. He initially thought that after the Eastern Land, Southern Sky, and Northern Glacier, the next topic would be about the western side. Unexpectedly, Zhu Quan's conversation took a turn, saying, "Speaking of which, these first 3 cultivation worlds, regardless of being righteous or demonic, at least have a legacy and an endless stream of cultivators. But this last cultivation world arose because of one person." Jian Wushuang was still completely unaware of such a significant event. Zhu Quan even suspected that Jian Wushuang might have consumed some rare and precious fruit, directly ascending from Immortal to a golden core stage cultivator. If not for Jian Wushuang's earlier display of insight and vision, Zhu Quan would have doubted it. But now, he only thought of Jian Wushuang as a diligent cultivator who didn't concern himself with worldly affairs, focusing solely on cultivation. Jian Wushuang was happy to maintain this impression, speaking about the mountains as if that were his life, further convincing Zhu Quan that he was indeed a reclusive cultivator from deep in the mountains. He was genuinely surprised by Zhu Quan's words. Not all of his reaction was feigned, as he was truly curious about who had such great ability, where one person alone could represent an entire cultivation world. It seemed a bit exaggerated. In this mundane world, the cultivators were very weak, far from the level of destroying the heavens and the earth. Zhu Quan saw Jian Wushuang's disbelief and lowered his voice, saying, "That last cultivation realm was once a vast and powerful realm. But because of one person, it became a legend and was completely erased from this world. Since then, that person has claimed to be a realm unto themselves and is now a mysterious figure in the cultivation world, so powerful that they are likely a grand cultivator in the divine appearance realm." "There are such extraordinary people?" Jian Wushuang nodded in admiration and then asked, "What is their title?" Zhu Quan replied, "This person doesn't have a formal title. They simply claim to be the prophet of the cultivation world, predicting the future. They even say that a peerless cultivator will emerge in recent years, breaking the chains of the mortal world and leading the entire cultivation realm to ascend to the spirit world." The prophet! Jian Wushuang's eyes contracted upon hearing the name, and he felt a deep shock in his heart. He couldn't forget the figure he had dreamed of before. It was precisely the figure of the prophet. A coincidence? In the past, Jian Wushuang might have believed it was a coincidence, but now he didn't. Everything probably had a cause and effect. Moreover, he suspected there were some schemes behind his being trapped in this world. Let's not forget that he had once split himself into countless bodies to pry open the coffin of the tomb of the gods, to find a path to transcend the tribulation. His thoughts wandered for a moment. Zhu Quan saw his silence and thought he was overwhelmed. So he comforted him, "Senior, don't be too surprised. Many cultivators privately dismiss him. Besides erasing that cultivation realm, he hasn't taken action again, so there's no real evidence of his strength. Maybe we've overestimated him." "Perhaps." Jian Wushuang nodded quietly. That's what he said outwardly, but he didn't think so inwardly. If only it were that simple. We've strayed a bit from the topic. Let's talk about the origins of the Great Tang, the Eastern cultivation realm. Its story is just as captivating as that of the prophet. Zhu Quan spoke eloquently, recounting the splendor and past grudges of the Great Tang in the East. 1,000 years ago, there was no Great Tang in the East. At that time, the East was the weakest of the four major cultivation realms. Moreover, the East always believed in Buddhism. The few cultivators that existed were not skilled in combat and were often bullied by cultivators from other realms while seeking opportunities and treasures. Later, a remarkable figure emerged. He was originally a prince of Immortal dynasty, who later married a princess of the Great Tang and came to Tian City. Their union was considered a political marriage between dynasties, but they genuinely loved each other. Even though the prince became a consort, he had no complaints and was deeply in love with the princess, a love story of that era. However, the good times didn't last. A few years after their marriage, the princess suddenly fell gravely ill. At that time, although the Tang royal family had immortals among them, they couldn't cure the princess. It was rumored that only by going to the northern glacier and seeking the inheritance of ancient immortals could her illness be cured. But at that time, the cultivators of the East couldn't even defend their territory, let alone venture to the northern glacier for opportunities. Besides, it was just a princess, and the Tang dynasty wasn't willing to risk sending their venerated immortals. Moreover, because Buddhism was prevalent at the time, everything emphasized destiny. In essence, they let things take their course. But the consort couldn't accept this. To save the princess, he ventured to the northern glacier as a mere mortal. He was gone for decades, and when everyone thought he had perished, he miraculously returned. And he had become a grand cultivator in the nascent soul stage. This event shocked the cultivation realm of the East at that time. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang couldn't help but ask, "And then? Did the consort save the princess?" "No." Zhu Quan shook his head. What followed was a tale of regret. Even after the consort returned as a hero, he couldn't save the princess. It seemed that their fates were intertwined, and within a month of the consort's return, the princess passed away. This marked the beginning of the cultivation world in the Eastern land. The princess tomb. The consort built an enormous princess tomb. He also recruited many disciples, training a group of powerful cultivators for the princess tomb. He silently guarded the princess tomb for years. Now it had become the top cultivation power in the Eastern land. Jian Wushuang listened intently, reminded of Baoguang Temple. One temple, one tomb. However, he was more curious about what happened to the consort later on. Zhu Quan sighed with emotion and lamented, "This brings us to the method, the Dao inheritance that the consort found in the northern ice fields. He left it for the entire Eastern land, leading to today's Tang dynasty. After passing on the Dao, he renounced the secular world and became a monk at Baoguang Temple." Which true immortal was enshrined at Baoguang Temple? This reminded Jian Wushuang of what Xianxia said about the true immortal enshrined at Baoguang Temple. Furthermore, that temple was the first cultivation power in the Eastern land, marking the origin of its cultivation world. He initially thought that the consort might be the true immortal of Baoguang Temple. But unexpectedly, it was someone else. The true immortal of Baoguang Temple has nothing to do with this matter, and that senior is not the head monk. Zhu Quan shook his head and sighed lightly. "I only know that the consort became a monk at Baoguang Temple, but his story gradually faded away, and now no one knows if he is still at Baoguang Temple." After hearing the origin and history of the rise and fall of the cultivation world in the Eastern land, Jian Wushuang didn't feel the reverence that Zhu Quan had for it. Instead, he pondered some of the causal relationships within. The consort went to the northern ice fields because the princess was ill, transforming from an ordinary person to a nascent soul cultivator. A month after he returned, the princess passed away. Then he built the princess tomb out of love. Later, he became a monk. There were likely more hidden truths in this story. He couldn't believe that an ordinary person could rely on the power of love to become such a figure. Moreover, to renounce everything at the peak of his power to live as an ordinary person. If there really were such a person, he would genuinely want to meet him. Unknowingly, he had stayed at the first pavilion for an entire day. Usually, the third floor was a place where cultivators exchanged ideas, with tea served, and no one cared about the passage of time. However, Jian Wushuang had just arrived, and there were two people waiting for him, so he got up and bid farewell to Zhu Quan. When he left, he also conveniently asked Zhu Quan to inquire about someone's whereabouts. He had already figured out almost everything he wanted to know. Now, it was up to them to seize their opportunities. At present, there was such an opportunity. When he returned to the inn, Xiangyang and Jiangshang had both come back. They each spoke about the events they encountered and the information they gathered. However, neither of them had as detailed information as Jian Wushuang. When Jian Wushuang spoke of the 4 major cultivation realms and some of the hidden matters of the Eastern Land, they both showed expressions of surprise. Jiangshang was amazed by the wonders of the cultivation world, while Xiangyang was a bit disappointed, feeling that this world was too small. This was quite normal. After all, Jiangshang was an ordinary person. Even though he had become a cultivator, he knew too little and didn't have the grand perspective that Xiangyang did. In the past, Xiangyang had been a prodigy with a family of universe gods. He had a clear understanding of the entire layout of the realm god continent. Such a material world could hardly catch his eye now. Jian Wushuang, on the other hand, was indifferent. He knew that the road had to be traveled step by step. Not everything could be accomplished in one leap. The smaller this material world was, the safer it was for them. Of course, now he and Xiangyang were still pretending to be cultivators of the Tang dynasty, but they were just secluded, indifferent to worldly matters. Oh, and there's one more thing I forgot to mention. It's about the incident 3 years ago when the Tang Emperor was attacked. Jian Wushuang paused and then continued. This might be my entry point into the cultivation world. 3 years ago, the Tang Emperor was attacked by foreign tribes and almost lost his life. He fled the palace and later broke through to the nascent soul stage to kill the foreign tribes, reclaiming the throne. Xiangyang listened with wide eyes and said in surprise, "Attacked by foreign tribes? Didn't the Princess Tomb and Baoguang Temple just stand by and watch? The cultivators of the Princess Tomb don't interfere with the affairs of mortal dynasties, and Baoguang Temple doesn't like conflicts. They indeed just stood by and watched," Jian Wushuang analyzed. "I suspect that the identity of the foreign tribe back then was not simple. There must be something suspicious, but there's too little information to see through it. However, one thing is clear. When the Tang Emperor was attacked, it was an imperial concubine who shielded him from a fatal blow, or else the Tang Emperor would have died long ago." Jiangshang was taken aback and added, "I heard quite a bit about this when I was in the Jiang Kingdom. Back then, the Tang dynasty underwent great changes. The Tang Emperor fled overseas, and a strong foreign tribe took over the palace for a month. Later, the Tang Emperor returned and killed the foreign tribes, but the imperial concubine didn't die, though she was severely injured and remained in the palace. The Tang Emperor even issued an imperial edict seeking help to heal the imperial concubine. Jian Wushuang also knew about the imperial edict but hadn't paid it much attention. Hearing Jiangshang's explanation now, he became interested. A mortal imperial concubine shielding the Tang Emperor from a fatal attack and surviving was already unbelievable. The key point was that when the Tang Emperor left, he didn't take this concubine with him. Instead, she was imprisoned or perhaps carefully tended to by the foreign tribe's strongman as she lingered on the brink of death. Later, when the Tang Emperor returned and killed the foreign tribes, he announced that the imperial concubine was alive and issued an imperial edict seeking famous doctors to treat her. The more Jian Wushuang thought about it, the more familiar it seemed. Wasn't this the intelligence from the early Tang dynasty? Last time it was to save a princess. This time it was to save an imperial concubine. After succeeding with the former, the Tang dynasty rose to become the first dynasty in the Eastern Land. Eastern Land. Jian Wushuang stood by the window, silently repeating, "Eastern Land Tang dynasty." For a moment he looked dazed. Eastern Land? Tang dynasty? The Slaughter dynasty? It seemed familiar to him. Is it another coincidence? Jian Wushuang shook his head, no longer believing in coincidences. The path of mortals seemed like recultivation, but it felt remarkably similar to the path he once took to rise in the mortal world. Even the names were the same. He had once encountered an Eastern Land Tang dynasty, but he couldn't remember it clearly, only recalling endless slaughter there. Xiangyang, seeing his weary expression, approached to console him, saying, There's no need to be so anxious about integrating into the Eastern land cultivation world. Let's just go with the flow and explore those dangerous places and relics. Once we acquire treasures and become nascent soul cultivators, people will naturally come to recruit us, and it won't take long to break through this world. Hopefully so. Jian Wushuang nodded silently, then turned to Jiang Shang and said calmly, "Don't go to Baoguang Temple alone. Call me when you go." Jiang Shang was surprised but agreed nonetheless. The next morning, the three of them left the inn again, as they could only rest inside due to the nighttime curfew. Since the foreign tribe's intrusion 3 years ago, Taiyan City's regulations had become extremely strict. Even immortals could not move freely at night, or else they would be apprehended by the imperial court. Although the invasion by foreign tribes 3 years ago had drained the vitality of the Great Tang, the control over the capital was still strong. Walking on the streets, one could often see patrolling imperial guards, each a consummate martial artist, a group of 9 capable of capturing innate experts. Apart from the imperial guards, there was also the Immortal Execution Guard, exclusively loyal to the Tang Emperor. This was a force belonging exclusively to the Tang Emperor. Each member was an innate martial artist, working in groups of 3 to ensure the safety of the imperial city, and they rarely appeared in the outer city. As fate would have it, Jian Wushuang and Jiang Shang ran right into them. "Is this the Immortal Execution Guard?" Jiang Shang whispered. "No wonder the Great Tang is so powerful. The patrolling Immortal Execution Guard are all innate martial artists, and I've heard there are even immortal scouts in the shadows. It's unbelievable." Jian Wushuang shook his head calmly. "This is nothing. As long as there are resources, even the world's top figures will willingly bow their heads." This was a matter of experience. Merely relying on worldly knowledge was insufficient to comprehend the cultivation world. Currently, Jian Wushuang had a rough understanding of this small world. Based on his experience, he judged this to be a material world, a world where ascension was possible. However, the resources in this world were currently limited, insufficient for cultivators to break free from the cage. Even he was no exception. Without resources, relying solely on experience was just empty talk. Thus, Jian Wushuang and his companions needed to explore the secrets of this world step by step, seeking some lost treasures of heaven and earth to break free from this cage. Despite the fact that beyond this world, there were still constraints. Jian Wushuang knew very well that the entrance he had entered from was not an ordinary small world, but a world capable of bearing universe gods. It was important to note that the 4 great spacetimes could not bear universe gods. Yet, in that world, there were so many universe god-level monsters trying to escape. Among them were super-powerful beings within the universe gods. If it were Jian Wushuang's external body, he would still have confidence. His external body had the strength of 9 stars at its peak. Breaking this cage would naturally be no problem. But now, in this world, wanting to regain his peak was too difficult for him. Thinking of this, he soon arrived outside the Baoguang Temple. Just as he was about to enter, he noticed Jiang Shang standing still, eyes glazed, hesitating to move forward. "What is it?" Jian Wushuang asked, puzzled. Jiang Shang replied blankly, "It's nothing, just a feeling I can't describe when I saw the plaque." Hearing about the plaque, Jian Wushuang also glanced up. The 3 simple, large characters were nothing special. But one thing was very clear. The handwriting was by a cultivator. The crevices between the lines, containing an aura, were not carved by an ordinary person. However, for a Great Tang where immortals roamed freely, this was nothing surprising. If it weren't for Jiang Shang, Jian Wushuang wouldn't have paid attention. But he merely remembered this in his heart and was about to enter Baoguang Temple. At this moment, a young monk walked out from the temple alone. He was wearing a kasaya and had a delicate face, with eyes that held a sense of Zen wisdom. "Are you 2 here looking for someone?" the young monk asked directly. This surprised both Jian Wushuang and Jiang Shang, especially Jian Wushuang. After entering Taiyan City, the 3 of them kept a low profile. Although they mingled with some cultivators, they didn't actively reveal their strength or background. If there was any exposure, it would be Jian Wushuang, who had a brief conversation with Zhu Quan in the first tower. However, Zhu Quan was merely an immortal of the first tower and likely had little connection to the Baoguang temple. Jian Wushuang remained calm and composed. Although he was surprised, his expression didn't change at all. Zhang Shang, on the other hand, showed a bewildered expression. How did he know? Zhang Shang thought, her face turning serious. The young monk seemed to notice Zhang Shang's surprise, but he couldn't discern any expression from Jian Wushuang. Master Fengjue sent me to welcome you too. Master Fengjue? Upon hearing this name, Zhang Shang became even more puzzled. She didn't know this person at all. Jian Wushuang, however, nodded silently and said, "Let's go. Since we've been invited, it's better than wandering around in the dark." Yesterday at the first tower, they had heard Zhu Quan talk about several eminent monks in Baoguang Temple. Among them was this Master Fengjue. Fengjue, a Buddhist Mahayana Vajra. His strength had already reached the late Jindan stage, and with the Buddhist Vajra divine skill, he was invincible below the nascent soul stage, because Jindan stage cultivators couldn't break through his defense. More than 100 years ago, this Buddhist Vajra had preached in the southern heavens, which are now the southern seven kingdoms. Coming from the eastern lands, his teachings were disrupted by the cultivators of the southern heavens. In anger, he defeated 9 Jindan stage cultivators with one palm strike. It was this battle that made Master Fengjue famous. Now, more than 100 years later, his strength had become unfathomable. However, this was nothing to Jian Wushuang. Even if Zhu Quan praised this old monk to the skies, he was just a Jindan stage cultivator. He was simply curious as to why it was Master Fengjue. Although he was one of the top 3 monks in Baoguang Temple, they had little connection with him. If it were the founding host of Baoguang Temple, Jian Wushuang might not have been so puzzled. Or if it were a true immortal. With questions in their minds, the two followed the young bald monk into Baoguang Temple. Upon entering the inner courtyard, they occasionally saw devotees coming and going, their expressions solemn. Among them were devotees with troubled expressions, their eyes seeming vacant. However, whenever these people encountered the young monk, they respectfully called out, "Master Fancheng." This let Jian Wushuang and Zhang Shang learn the Dharma name of the young monk. They had thought he was just a young monk but didn't expect him to be a master. Thinking about it, in the mundane world, anyone in the temple who wasn't a child or teenager could be considered a master. Following Fancheng through the bustling front yard, it suddenly became much quieter. "I will leave you here and Master Fengjue will come shortly. Please wait a moment," Fancheng said with a gentle smile. Jian Wushuang nodded calmly. After the monk left, the two of them exchanged a glance without speaking. Instead, they began observing the backyard. The yard was very tidy, with no unnecessary furnishings. Both of their gazes turned to the open hall door in the backyard. Though they stood outside, they could vaguely make out a figure inside through the door. "What is that?" Zhang Shang frowned upon seeing the scene inside. Noticing her unusual expression, Jian Wushuang focused his attention there as well. Having reached the Jindan stage, both of them had heightened senses. Even from a distance, they could clearly see the scene inside the door. Especially Jian Wushuang, who could sense the scene inside with his mental power alone, without using his eyes. A statue of a Buddha. Jian Wushuang felt a stir in his heart, but didn't think there was anything amiss. However, when he looked more closely, he noticed something peculiar. Bao Guang Temple, a sacred place for Buddhists, where paying respects to a Buddha statue was natural. To outsiders, this was nothing unusual. However, for Jian Wushuang and Zhang Shang, there was much surprise and confusion regarding the statue. Jian Wushuang was the first to be surprised. He was both surprised and puzzled. What surprised him was that the statue looked very much like a person. Hu Qing. This was also what surprised and puzzled Zhang Shang. Because the moment she saw the statue, something in her heart was suddenly stirred, as if she had seen someone who had never existed yet appeared in her life. Zhang Shang, or rather Zhang Shang. In her life, there were indeed many connections with Hu Qing. Since childhood, she had been adopted by Hu Qing. The The bond between master and disciple may have taken less than half of Hu Qing's time, but it occupied Zhang Shang's entire life. The past memories flashed before Jian Wushuang's eyes, but the current Zhang Shang remembered nothing. She only felt an inexplicable feeling toward the statue, like seeing the plaque outside the door. Sigh! Jian Wushuang sighed inwardly. What was meant to happen would happen. He had long noticed that this small world seemed to have countless connections to his past. Now seeing the statue of Hu Qing confirmed the suspicions in his heart. He just didn't know when all this would end. Just as both were lost in their thoughts, a voice brought them back to reality. You two seem very interested in our Bao Guang Temple's Tongtian Buddha master. A shadow in a black robe, unnoticed until then, stood behind them. Upon hearing the voice, they both turned to look. I am Monk Fengju. The monk in black robes clasped his hands together and lowered his brow slightly. A black-robed monk. This attire was rather strange. Jian Wushuang, well-traveled and knowledgeable, didn't find it odd but was rather taken aback by the monk's words. Tongtian Buddha Master? He asked in surprise. Is he still alive? The black-robed Fengju paused, then smiled awkwardly. You overestimate our Bao Guang Temple. The Tongtian Buddha Master is the Lord of the Heavens. I, a humble monk, do not know. Once again, the heavens. This time Jian Wushuang gave up and speculated inwardly that this statue was likely an inheritance from the prince consort back then, not from this world. But why use the title Tongtian Buddha Master? It was clearly Hu Qing's statue. He had many questions in his heart, but the black-robed monk before him couldn't explain them, so he chose not to ask further. Beside him, Zhang Shang voiced her own doubts. Master Fengju, how did you know we were coming to Bao Guang Temple, and specifically asked Master Fanshin to bring us here? Zhang Shang's eyes showed suspicion. Jian Wushuang was equally curious and wanted to hear the monk's explanation. There's no rush. First, you two should go pay respects to the Tongtian Buddha Master. Fengju appeared unhurried, disregarding their expressions, as he walked past them towards the main hall where the statue was enshrined. Jian Wushuang and the others could only follow along. He wanted to see what exactly the other party was hiding. Ever since they arrived in Taiyan City, he felt an indescribable presence surrounding them. Perhaps he could learn something he wanted to know from Hei Fengjue. Entering the grand hall of the backyard, a gentle incense filled his mind. Fengjue took out some incense, handed it over, and then proceeded to light it and bow deeply. Zhang Shang followed suit. When it was Jian Wushuang's turn, he stood still and did not bow. It wasn't that he was too proud to bow, but he found it odd. He was now expected to burn incense for Hu Qing's image. Thinking back to when he first met Hu Qing in the great wilderness, he couldn't help but sigh. Why? Does benefactor Wushuang not believe in Buddha? Hei Fengjue was not surprised and looked at Jian Wushuang with a calm expression. It didn't matter if he didn't bow. However, Jian Wushuang still forced himself to bow and light a stick of incense. I once revered him like a god. Jian Wushuang's voice suddenly sounded ancient and weary, but there was another sentence in his heart. He once revered me like a god. The entire morning, Jian Wushuang and Zhang Shang followed the black-robed monk, Fengjue, around Baoguang Temple. They walked and chatted. Until noon, at the earnest invitation of their host, the two left. On the way back, Zhang Shang asked with a puzzled expression, Senior, why were you in such a hurry to leave? I think Master Fengjue had more to say. If we waited for him to finish, we wouldn't be able to leave. Jian Wushuang shook his head silently. Don't think of him as so mysterious. The things he knows are probably learned from the first floor, pretending to be mysterious in black robes, but there's nothing special about him. Zhang Shang, who half understood, fell half a step behind him and rolled her eyes. In her view, Jian Wushuang, this old-fashioned man, had been away from the mundane world for too long. He thought no one was better than him, always with an aloof demeanor. This was her conclusion after these many days. Moreover, she often noticed that when Jian Wushuang was with Xianxia, he always put on a look of deep bitterness. But she didn't know how frustrated Jian Wushuang felt at that moment, especially today seeing Hu Qing's image. Back at the inn, the two went to their respective rooms. Jiang Shang was still savoring Master Fengjue's words from today. Especially when Master Fengjue mentioned the Jiang Kingdom, Jian Wushuang was the same, except his gains were different from Jiang Shang's. First, Master Fengjue subtly told them in many words to leave Taiyan City, or rather, to leave the Tang dynasty. Thinking it over, yesterday he hadn't revealed much to Zhu Quan. How did they notice us? Jian Wushuang frowned, puzzled. It was his first time meeting the black-robed monk, and nothing he said to Zhu Quan was revealing. Why did a monk from Baoguang Temple take notice of him? Initially, he was excited, thinking the other party knew his true identity, especially when he saw Hu Qing's image, and that black robe. At the time, even if Fengjue's true identity was the demon Lord Wutian, he would have believed it. But the words Fengjue said later were completely mundane. He only knew from Zhu Quan that he was an ascetic. But Jiang Shang's background was unknown to the other party. Considering that he had been investigated, Jiang Shang would certainly not escape either. After all, it was extremely difficult to erase one's past identity as a ruler of a country. It was normal to have her true identity discovered. It seems it's not aimed at me. Jian Wushuang stood with his hands behind his back. After pondering for a moment, he reached a conclusion. Baoguang Temple was not targeting him but Jiang Shang. Otherwise, he couldn't think of why Fengjue would investigate them. And today, subtly tell them to leave Taiyan City. Jiang Shang might not have noticed, but he understood the meaning behind the words. Was he trying to warn Jiang Shang? Taiyan City was not peaceful. Late at night, a light rain covered the entire Taiyan City. Due to the curfew, the only sound on the streets was the raindrops hitting the eaves, with no other noise. The Xianxia guards patrolling Taiyan City moved like ghosts, concealed in the darkness without revealing a trace of themselves. At this moment, a few figures in black faintly appeared on the otherwise empty street. Through the raindrops, these figures disappeared from the street in the blink of an eye. Their presence lasted less than a breath before it immediately attracted the attention of the Xianxia guards. This district belonged to the outer city, but a squad of Xianxia guards was also responsible for this area. As the force responsible for the safety of the entire Taiyan City and being directly under the command of His Majesty Emperor Tang, the Xianxia guards had extremely exaggerated authority. At night, they could be considered the rulers of Taiyan City. If they discovered suspicious individuals, they had the privilege of acting before reporting, and even if a prince was killed, they would not be held accountable. In the past, Taiyan City was not this strict, but since the intrusion of the alien king 3 years ago, the entire city had been on high alert. Even though Emperor Tang had once again ascended to the throne, the curfew had become increasingly strict. TSK, to act so blatantly at night, are they seeking death? On the eaves, a middle-aged man wearing a flying snow robe with a wine jug at his waist exuded a murderous aura. Behind him, 2 young men in similar attire quickly appeared, but they only had a single copper coin at their collars. The middle-aged man with the wine jug at his waist, however, had as many as 6 copper coins. These copper coins were not ordinary. They bore an aura from ancient times. They were also the symbol of the Xianxia guards. Lord Yang, why are you in the Tongan district? The 2 Xianxia guards respectfully clasped their fists, feeling deeply surprised. In the Xianxia guards, the number of copper coins on the chest represented power and status. A Xianxia guard with 6 copper coins was at least at the command level. Their strength could easily sweep through ordinary Xianxia guards. Such a powerful figure would usually only appear in the imperial city. In the entire outer city, only a few Xianxia guards with 4 copper coins were responsible for its security. Humph! The middle-aged man casually touched the 6 copper coins on his chest, removed the wine jug from his waist, and with a flick of his finger, a wisp of clear air flew out. If I were not here, would those people have been able to roam Taiyan City so recklessly? 2 ordinary Xianxia guards shuddered in fear. One of them quickly bowed and said, Lord Yang, those people just now were from the holy sect. The Southern Protector has ordered that they be allowed to move around the outer city. The Southern Protector? Xiao lowered his eyebrows and sneered. He was a Xianxian guard expert with strength comparable to Xiao. However, among the Xianxian guards there were two types. One type was like Xiao, who was powerful and possessed 6 copper coins, but was not part of the Xianxian guard's upper echelon. The other type was those who were powerful and held high positions within the Xianxian guards. The Southern Protector was a high-ranking member of the Xianxian guards. Although both had the strength of 6 copper coins, Xiao could do nothing against him. Go back and tell Nanshan that imperial authority is not meant for him to misuse. And as for that damn holy sect, a mere martial arts sect forcing the imperial authority to bow down is an insult to the prestige of the Xianxian guards. After speaking, Yang Zhao's figure flickered and disappeared above the eaves. The Xianxian guard who had spoken earlier immediately breathed a sigh of relief. They could not withstand the pressure of such a powerful person. A Xianxian guard with 1 copper coin was an innate expert. With 2 copper coins, they were late-stage innate experts. 3 copper coins represented innate perfection. Every 3 copper coins marked a threshold. 6 copper coins signified the ultimate in immortality, the pinnacle of the golden core, comparable to Master Fengjue of Baoguang Temple. Such formidable figures naturally made them tremble. Luckily, this Xiao doesn't have much power. Otherwise, just for ignoring the holy sect's experts earlier, he could have beheaded us both. Sigh, we're just unlucky. Xiao usually patrols the imperial city. Why did he appear in the outer city today? Don't think about it. It's not something us copper guards can speculate on. Let's go. Report to the Southern Protector on the city wall, and then we can head to the brothel for some drinks. Haha, let's go. The two of them maneuvered swiftly over the eaves and quickly reached the city wall, as they were in the outer city. Inside a high building on the city wall, flames lit up the sky, making the top floor as bright as day. In the center was a chessboard, but only one person sat by the board, playing chess alone. Report, Protector. Xiao appeared in the Copper Mountain district and discovered traces of the holy sect. Click. A chess piece was placed, and the Southern Protector of Nanshan did not lift his head. He merely acknowledged with a calm hum and dismissed the 2 copper guards, continuing his game. After about the time it takes to burn an incense stick, he took a deep breath, glanced at the chessboard, and slowly stood up. He turned to look at Tian City behind him. The middle-aged man in black regular attire had eyes like torches, as if he could see through the entire Tian City at a glance. Xiao, even you have noticed something? His voice was low, carrying an inexplicable sorrow, but it quickly vanished. In the deep night, Tian City was like a wild beast, devouring all darkness. Yet in this darkness, a cold light flashed. Behind the cold light lurked a terrifying force. It was precisely the group from the holy sect that had been moving around the outer city earlier. A group of 9, each a golden core stage immortal. At this moment, they were concealed at a crossroads. Elder, the 2 who went to Baoguang Temple during the day can be confirmed to be staying in the inn and have not left. Good. Keep watching, and wait for my order before taking action. The leading elder of the holy sect waved his hand. The figure in the black robe then re-entered the inn. But just as he entered the inn, a man and a woman blocked his way. Swish! The figure in the black robe showed no surprise, casually pulling off the robe and saying calmly, 9 golden core stage immortals, with one even being a late-stage golden core expert. It seems a battle is inevitable tonight. Fortunately, Wuxia had prepared in advance. Otherwise, tonight would have been troublesome. Xianxia looked at Jian Wuxia, who had shed the black robe, with a smile. Jian Wuxia's expression remained stern. After returning from Baoguang Temple, he felt increasingly uneasy, understanding Master Fengjue's warning, realizing that this matter was targeting Jiangshang. He had made preparations early, observing the area around the inn and even catching a spy. The one keeping watch was a golden core stage immortal. In the evening, he had acted directly to kill the spy. Using his spiritual power, he altered his aura and disguised himself as a member of the holy sect. This led to the scene just now. Fortunately, his spiritual power was strong. Otherwise, tonight would have been fraught with danger. At least now he was in the dark, and the opponent was in the open, giving him room to breathe. Don't be careless. The ordinary cultivators in the Golden Core stage are not a big concern, but the elder among them is probably not simple. Even for me to kill him, it would take some time. And this is Tian City, where there are the Immortal slaying guards. If a fight breaks out, it will quickly draw their attention. Once we're surrounded by the Immortal slaying guards, they won't care who made the first move. Moreover, I suspect these Immortal slaying guards have some connection with the Holy Sect. Otherwise, these demon sect cultivators wouldn't be able to enter the city. His suspicions were not unfounded. Ever since they captured a demon sect cultivator, he had attempted to leave the city with Xianxia and Xianxia at night, but they had barely left the tavern when they sensed a powerful aura. That aura was at least at the peak of the Golden Core stage. Feeling threatened, they had no choice but to return to the tavern. If I had known, we would have chosen another place, Xianxia said, somewhat regretfully. Xianxia disagreed, frowning as he said, "It wouldn't matter where we go. Once we're targeted by these demon sect members, there's nowhere to hide in Tian City. Let's not think so negatively. At least we're not completely passive. We still have the initiative." Jian Wushuang's eyes flashed with cold light. Just a mere group of Golden Core stage cultivators. If it had been 3 days ago, he might have been a bit troubled. But now they weren't much of a threat. As his thought power gradually recovered, he had a premonition that this small world couldn't suppress his powerful thoughts. In other places, even if his consciousness had returned to a mortal state, his strong thought power could still allow his avatar to return to his main body. However, this world constantly bound him. Combined with the prophet in his dreams, Jiang Shang, and Hu Qing's Tao image, he increasingly felt that this world might exist because of him, which was why he couldn't break through it. Though unable to break through normally, his thought power continued to grow. Now, his thought power could cover an area of 30 miles, encompassing the entire Tongshan district. Such powerful thought power couldn't even be achieved by a cultivator in the nascent soul stage. The key was that this immense thought power could not only survey the surroundings but also exert pressure. Pressure that surpassed that of a nascent soul stage cultivator. It was enough to sweep through ordinary Golden Core stage cultivators, and even strong late-stage Golden Core experts would be subdued. This was Jian Wushuang's confidence. Jian Wushuang frowned, taking out the token obtained from the demon sect cultivator, and warned, "Prepare for battle. Those guys are sneaking in." "All right, understood." Xiangyang and Jiangshang both leaped onto the beam on the first floor, while Jian Wushuang stood on the second floor, using his thought power to cover a radius of 10 miles. He didn't cover the full area because he wanted to concentrate his power to exert enough pressure to overwhelm the Golden Core stage. He left the rest to Xiangyang and Jiangshang. The two of them were to join forces to ambush the demon sect elder. This elder was a late-stage Golden Core cultivator with formidable strength. Jian Wushuang's current thought power was enough to shatter him. However, a brief restraint was still achievable. Outside the tavern, at a crossroads, a group of 9 people in black robes quietly approached the tavern under the cover of rain. "Be careful. Make sure to kill with one strike." The eyes of the demon sect elder were fierce, but as soon as they entered the tavern, a powerful pressure descended instantly. Thud. In an instant, 8 of the black-robed men fell to their knees, blood oozing from their orifices, their eyes wide open, dead beyond doubt. This pressure was completely contained within the tavern. Outside, the gentle rain continued, unnoticed by anyone. At this moment, Jian Wushuang's thought power covered only part of the tavern. Except for the demon sect elder, everyone else perished. Jian Wushuang drew his sword and rushed downstairs, shouting angrily, "Attack!" The 3 of them began their encirclement and assault from different angles. At that moment, the elder of the demon cult came to his senses. The pressure he had felt earlier was far stronger than anything he had encountered from any other formidable opponent, but that feeling had only lasted for an instant. Once he regained his clarity, he noticed that he was being besieged from three sides. Although he was surprised by the recent oppressive force, he instinctively resisted. With a shake of his sleeves, he pushed Jiang Shang and Xiangyang back several feet, while Jian Wushuang charged at him head-on. Die! Jian Wushuang's brow emitted a powerful pressure once again. But this time it was not as effective as the first. It only instilled some fear in the demon cult elder. However, having just casually pushed Jiang Shang and Xiangyang away, he regained his confidence. Facing Jian Wushuang's sword tip, the elder clasped his hands together and blocked it directly. The demon cult elder's aura surged immediately. Initially, he was prepared to escape. The earlier aura had caused him to feel apprehensive, even suppressing his ability to exert his full combat strength. However, he easily broke through the siege of the three attackers. What is happening? The source of that powerful aura made him shiver with fear, yet he was facing three ordinary cultivators at the golden core stage. At this point, Jiang Shang and Xiangyang charged forward again. Meanwhile, Jian Wushuang took the opportunity to disengage from the demon cult elder, rising into the air, and his mental pressure swept over once more. But mental pressure was only effective the first time. Its effectiveness diminished with each subsequent use. The demon cult elder understood that the oppressive force likely did not originate from a super-strong expert but from some kind of treasure. Instantly, his eyes heated up. With such a powerful treasure in his possession, he could achieve invincibility at the golden core stage and even rival those at the nascent soul stage. What had initially been an ordinary hunting task unexpectedly turned into an encounter with such a great opportunity, igniting greed in his heart. Humph! 3 insignificant brats. He clasped his hands again and struck out with his palms, unleashing a burst of thunder. The entire tavern shook with the explosion. Not good. Jian Wushuang raised his sword to cut through the thunderous strike. What threatened him wasn't the thunder itself, but the commotion it caused, which would certainly attract the attention of the Immortal execution guards. This was his real concern. As for the people inside the tavern, he had already forcibly hypnotized them with his thought power. Now they were all sound asleep, and even if the tavern collapsed, they would not wake up. Xiangyang, you two keep him occupied for just a breath. Jian Wushuang's breathing was slightly heavy. He couldn't afford to be arrogant any longer. He needed to burn his thought power to kill the opponent. However, doing so would significantly deplete his thought power. This was currently his means of self-preservation. Previously, when he encountered those strong demon cult members in Shanghai County, he had escaped disaster by relying on his strong thought power. Even though he was much stronger now than he was then, this was Taiyan City, the core of the entire Eastern cultivation world. Naturally, he did not dare to be careless. If a super-strong expert was drawn here, he might end up suffering a severe defeat. Therefore, unless absolutely necessary, he would not burn his thought power to fight, not even to escape. His thought power was strong enough, intangible and colorless that if he wanted to leave, no one could find him. However, Jiang Shang and Xiangyang would have to be abandoned. Jian Wushuang naturally wouldn't give up on the two of them and was determined to give it his all. With my divine thought, killing someone at the golden core stage is truly a waste. He raised one hand, concentrating a beam of light on his fingertip, which pointed directly at his own forehead. Open! Buzz! A slit slowly expanded on his forehead, revealing the golden eye hidden there. Kill! Boom! The eye on his forehead instantly unleashed a powerful aura. This aura was invisible and colorless because it was a consciousness attack. To use this method to attack an enemy, mere personal strength was not enough. In this small world, even cultivators at the divine aspect level couldn't achieve this because cultivators here didn't need such advanced techniques. For example, a divine aspect cultivator who wanted to kill a nascent soul cultivator only needed a flying sword or a palm strike to annihilate them. There was no need for a consciousness attack, and crucially, they only knew ordinary consciousness pressure, unable to comprehend consciousness attacks. This was a secret consciousness technique created by Jian Wushuang through countless thought powers. First, consciousness pressure had to pose a threat to those of the same level. If it didn't threaten peers, there was no need to cultivate it. Back when Jian Wushuang was a Dao master, he became an invincible Dao master and developed some innate methods for consciousness pressure. Later, he inadvertently created consciousness attacks, but in the outside world, he hadn't had the opportunity to use them. Because his strength had broken through too quickly, he hadn't needed this method. Unexpectedly, he used it in the small world, so his original creation wasn't in vain, even if killing someone at the Golden Core stage was quite wasteful. Fortunately, the crisis was resolved. The consciousness attack extinguished the demonic elder's spirit, leaving his body standing and performing its previous actions. Dead. Jiang Shang's eyes were filled with disbelief. Even Xianxia felt the same. He was originally a universe master and a 9th tribulation universe master at that. But even he couldn't exceed his level with thought power, whereas Jian Wushuang could, and he could even burn thought power to kill that demonic elder. Xianxia was shocked, thinking, he truly deserves to be a super strong universe god, but he didn't know that Jian Wushuang hadn't yet undergone the divine tribulation. Don't just stand there, quickly clean up and deal with those corpses. At dawn, we'll leave the city. Jian Wushuang's voice carried a hint of fatigue. Originally, he hadn't planned to leave the city, but now he needed to go out to avoid trouble. Inside Tian City, things were somewhat restrictive, and he couldn't act freely. So they needed to leave the city. In fact, the danger inside the city was less than outside. Once outside, unless they ran very far, they would still encounter trouble. However, at that time, Jian Wushuang could expand his thought power to probe 30 miles around and even conceal their presence, making it difficult for others to detect them. It was a pity about the countless treasures in Tian City. He couldn't manage to obtain them now. Firstly, he had no money, and secondly, because of his identity. If he could secure a valid identity with his methods, he could acquire a batch of treasures to surpass the Golden Core stage within a year. Then, becoming a nascent soul cultivator, he could completely control the Eastern Land Cultivation realm, directly plundering all heavenly treasures and quickly becoming the strongest in this world. By then, his thought power might have reached a terrifying level, enough to shatter the void and ascend to the upper realm. But now he had to leave. Jian Wushuang sighed and glanced at Xianxia again, feeling a bit annoyed. Why did his little mistress abandon him? If Xing Luo were guiding him, he could quickly restore all his strength, and breaking through this world wouldn't be a problem. Alas! He sighed slightly in his heart and was about to turn back into the room to rest when his brow furrowed. A powerful aura was approaching the inn, stronger than the demonic elder, nearly at the level of Master Fengjue. Definitely a super expert among Golden Core cultivators who could kill the demonic elder within 3 moves. Quick, hide! There's an unfamiliar presence approaching. Jian Wushuang gave a warning and then immediately withdrew his thought power, retreating into the room. Through the gap under the bed, he observed with his naked eye. On the street, a middle-aged man with a wine gourd hanging at his waist and a long sword slung across his shoulder was rapidly approaching the inn. This person was the very presence Jian Wushuang had sensed earlier. Xianxia. He was a member of the Golden Crow Guards among the Immortal Slaying Guards, with 6 copper coins on his chest. 1 copper coin signified the Copper Snake Guards. 3 copper coins indicated elite status, belonging to the Silver Snake Guards within the Immortal Slaying Guards. They usually patrolled the inner city in teams of 3 and could contend with Foundation establishment cultivators. Above the Silver Snake Guards were the Gold Snake Guards, each at the Foundation establishment stage. Further up were the Golden Crow Guards. This was the highest-ranking patrol guard within the Immortal Slaying Guards. Even within the Imperial City, there were only 2 teams of Golden Crow Guards, one in the open and one in the shadows. However, there were several scattered Golden Crow Guards within the palace. They generally only patrolled the Imperial City and the palace. Yang Zhao's appearance in the outer city surprised the 2 Copper Snake Guards, and they hadn't expected Yang Xiao to remain hidden in the outer city. He had even secretly followed the group from the Holy Sect. He pursued them all the way to the inn. The presence disappeared here. As soon as Yang Xiao landed, he alertly gripped his sword. Although his strength was formidable, his thought power was still at the Foundation establishment stage, making it impossible to detect the traces of the earlier battle. He had to rely on his eyes to observe. But this left a significant hidden danger for Jian Wushuang. The gentle wind and rain. The sound of raindrops hitting the inn's door didn't produce the usual rustling noise, but instead made a pattering sound against the wood. The rustling sound came from the rain hitting the paper covering the doors. But now that sound was absent. As a golden crow guard, Yang Zhao's mind was extremely sharp, and his eyes turned toward the inn's doors. The paper on a row of doors was already shattered, so the only sound he heard was raindrops hitting the wooden doors. With just one glance, he noticed the anomaly. This inn was normal during the day. Yang Zhao's heart stirred, and he slowly moved forward. Standing by the second-floor window, Jian Wushuang hadn't expected such a small detail to expose him. The paper had been shattered earlier by the actions of the demonic sect elder, which he had forgotten. This is bad. It looks like we can only make a run for it. Jian Wushuang's expression shifted as he prepared to signal Jiang Shang and Xianxia to sneak out the other side. Even if they encountered other immortal slaying guards, he could avoid them one by one using thought power, and if they couldn't get past the city gate, they would have to wait until dawn. There was no choice. Yang Xiao had already entered the inn. The signs of battle on the ground would expose them, and even if they pretended to be asleep, the entire inn would be captured by the immortal slaying guards by morning. Let's go! Jian Wushuang wrapped the two in his thought power and quietly slipped out through the window. With his thought power, he could evade the patrols of the Foundation establishment stage. However, they could not escape the visible and hidden copper snake immortal slayers. These immortal slayers could still patrol with their naked eyes. Once discovered, a chain reaction would occur, causing chaos throughout the city, which was not something Jian Wushuang wanted to see. So he took Jiang Shang and Xianxia directly to the inner city. They even planned to go to the Imperial City. This was because everywhere there were immortal slayers in the Jindan stage, and most Jindan cultivators would not foolishly patrol with their naked eyes. Instead, they would sit cross-legged in a place, covering 100 feet around them with thought power, occasionally walking around to probe with their thought power. In their view, this method was more efficient. Jian Wushuang had figured out the loophole in this and took the two of them to the Imperial City. There was no way in the outer city, which was full of fools using their eyes. If he took the two of them around at night, they would easily be discovered. His thought power was not enough to make the three of them invisible, so he simply entered the Imperial City. He played the trick of hiding under the lamp. As for the noble Golden Crow guard Yang Xiao among the immortal slayers, he was still checking everyone in the tavern one by one. But after checking around, he hadn't drawn his sword even once. All ordinary people? Yang Xiao frowned. He had rushed over from another place, and it took less than a stick of incense time. He firmly believed that the other party could not have escaped so quickly. He then went to the backyard to search around and finally only found 10 corpses. Among them was one who had been stalking them earlier, of which he was unaware. The rest were the group he had seen. The moment he saw these corpses, cold sweat broke out on Yang Zhao's back. Although he was stronger than that demonic cult elder, he had no confidence in defeating this group of people, let alone killing them, especially under the eyes of the immortal slayers who could instantly kill so many experts. A nascent soul? This was Yang Zhao's first thought, and he immediately crushed the highest level token among the immortal slayers. The headquarters of the immortal slayers, set deep in the Imperial Palace, instantly received Yang Zhao's call for help. Yang Xiao has crushed the token. Activate the highest alert in the city. Soon, the entire Immortal Slayer force was mobilized. Because it was a rescue message from the Golden Crow Guard from the 6 copper coins, it was certainly a threat from a nascent soul, which was enough to mobilize the entire Tian City Immortal Slayers to respond. Although there were nascent soul experts hidden among the Immortal Slayers, they knew very well that if a nascent soul cultivator went on a rampage in Tian City, it would take several nascent soul cultivators to stop them. That was why the highest alert was activated. Of course, this alert was from the Imperial City. The inner city was secondary, and as for the outer city, it didn't matter how many died. Similarly, there was no significant change in the palace, and the eunuchs yawned as usual while standing in front of the palace gate. It wasn't until a team of immortal slayers arrived that the little eunuch in front of the hall perked up a bit. Lord Chong. The little eunuch just cupped his hands slightly. Despite his young age, he wore a robe embroidered with pythons and was a close minister of the emperor. Even the absolute high-level Chong Feng among the immortal slayers had to treat him with a smile. Lord Wang. Please inform Lord Han. There is an important matter to report. Chong Feng lowered his posture considerably, even taking out a gold bar to secretly slip to the little eunuch. The little eunuch casually tucked it into his sleeve, glanced at Lord Chong, saw he was accompanied by several golden snake guards, and realized it was a matter of great importance that could not be delayed. He nodded and hurried into the hall. This was the Hall of Mental Cultivation, where Emperor Tang practiced cultivation. Since the rebellion of the strange king 3 years ago, which caused him much suffering, after regaining the throne, he had been immersed in cultivation. Even after reaching the nascent soul stage, he had not relaxed. With the support of the entire Tang dynasty, he broke through 3 years later and had already reached the mid-nascent soul stage, a speed considered a miracle in the cultivation world. Inside the hall, an elderly eunuch, standing with lowered eyes, slowly lifted his head and looked at the entering eunuch, Wang Gonggong. Lord Han. Master Chong has urgent business to discuss with you. Wang Gonggong kept his head lowered. He could face Chong Feng, who held power over life and death in Tian City, without batting an eye, and even gain some benefits. However, in front of Han Gong, Chief Eunuch Han, he didn't dare to breathe heavily. In the entire palace, aside from the emperor, not even the emperor could exert such pressure on him. This was a figure of immense power within the palace and throughout the entire eastern lands. He was reputed to be the strongest within the palace. Even the Zhantian Guard, established within the palace and consisting of many experts, couldn't compare to this grand eunuch before him. For a eunuch to reach such heights, granted titles and nobility, spoke volumes. All right, you may go, Chief Eunuch Han Chongzhou said calmly. Wang Gonggong didn't dare to urge him. Even if rebels were attacking from outside, he wouldn't dare to rush Lord Han. After the young eunuch left, Han Chongzhou turned and entered the inner hall, emerging shortly thereafter and heading straight outside. Waiting outside the hall, Master Chong Feng showed no hint of complaint, instead greeting him respectfully. Lord Han. The group of golden snake guards behind him also bowed their heads in salute. Han Chongzhou didn't even lift his eyelids, standing with his hands behind his back at the entrance of the hall, and said quietly, "The Emperor is already aware of the specifics. Master Chong, just handle your responsibilities well. There's no need to worry or ask about the rest." "Yes," Chong Feng replied, lowering his head. However, his eyes held a sharp glint. After his departure, Master Chong, accompanied by several subordinates, returned to the Zhantian Guard with a grim expression. The events of that night left him with a strong sense of crisis. It wasn't because of some mysterious nascent soul expert, but because of the frequent actions of the sacred sect in Tian City. The so-called sacred sect was actually a demonic cult. It was only called a sacred sect because the emperor valued it. This was their fault years ago when they failed to protect the emperor, allowing the cultivation sects to invade imperial power. Originally, this demonic cult only relied on the court for some benefits, but in recent years, they had frequently visited Tian City, especially the saintess of the cult, who often entered the palace. The current emperor highly valued people from the demonic cult. Some matters in Tian City were handled by the demonic cult rather than the Zhantian Guard. That's why Chong Feng felt a sense of crisis. It wasn't because his position was threatened, but because placing value on cultivation sects would eventually lead down a divergent path, especially when valuing a demonic cult. The Zhantian Guard not only patrolled Tian City but also had the role of overseeing the world. Over the years, so many innocent people had died. Chong Feng wasn't blind. Despite the Zhantian Guard constantly shrinking, with its scope now reduced to Tian City, the things happening outside couldn't be concealed. Moreover, with so many deaths, anyone with some capability was well aware. The headquarters of the Zhantian Guard was a 7-story tower. The first floor was where the bronze snake guards worked, a place with many people. Those who worked there were responsible for organizing dossiers and information and generally didn't go out to patrol. They also wouldn't go to the second floor. There were 7 floors and each floor was divided into levels. Chong Feng was the commander of the Golden Crow Guards, and he could directly go to the 7th floor. This place towered into the clouds, and there were huge floor-to-ceiling windows that allowed one to see the entire Imperial Palace and even Great Peace City. It was also the tallest building in the entire palace. From this building, it could be seen how highly the Xianxia guards had been regarded by the emperor. Unfortunately, these years, the monarch and his subjects were somewhat separated. Chong Feng arrived at the 7th level. He looked at the tall and sturdy figure in a black cloak standing by the window and sighed. "Commander, His Majesty wants us to leave this matter alone. Do you think we should still investigate this matter?" The stalwart man by the window didn't say anything. He kept looking out the window. After a long while, he said indifferently, "Then don't bother." But Chong Feng was somewhat unconvinced. Facing the Han Palace and the emperor, he did not dare to throw such a small tantrum. However, the commander who had established the Xianxia guards was like the master of all the Xianxia guards. No matter what happened, they did not dare to hide anything, not even their emotions. Just like now, Chong Feng was acting according to his nature. The devil cult is wreaking havoc and His Majesty is indulging it. If this continues, the world will probably be in chaos. This goes against the teachings of the previous emperor and our ancestors. Why must we blindly tolerate it? Could it be that 3 years ago? Before Chong Feng could finish, he was interrupted by the commander. "Enough!" When the calm commander heard the words 3 years, his body trembled slightly. He took a deep breath before calming down. "Call Xianxia to see me. I have my own arrangements for the rest." There was a strange look in the commander's deep eyes. Even though Chong Feng still wanted to say something, he could only leave helplessly. Below the imperial city, outside the palace, this was the gathering place of the nobles of Great Peace City. It was also the core of the entire dynasty. Most of the people who could live here were members of the royal family, and some of them were officials of the imperial court. All of them were officials of the 3rd rank and above. Therefore, most of the imperial city was filled with deep courtyards. There were very few small courtyards. Even if there were a few small courtyards, they were all people with noble statuses. The drizzle gradually turned into a downpour. In the rainy night, people rushed and the clouds moved in all directions. Although the Tang Emperor was indifferent to this matter, the Immortal slaying troop did not relax at all. They continued to patrol the entire imperial city with the highest alert. Swoosh! A group of figures flew past the roof of a large courtyard. One of the figures paused for a moment. "Leave 2 people to guard the princess's manor." "Yes, sir." 2 black-robed figures instantly descended and hid in the princess's manor. The rest of them gradually disappeared in the heavy rain. After they had walked far away, 3 figures suddenly appeared behind a fake mountain in the princess's manor. This was a secret passage in the rockery. However, it had been abandoned for a long time. Even many people in the manor did not know about it and had long forgotten about it, let alone those Xianxia guards. This was a very suitable place to hide. Coincidentally, a 5-coin golden snake guard had also hidden himself here. It happened to be hiding in the same place as Jian Wushuang and the other 2. "Brother Wushuang, should we kill him?" Xiangyang's eyes were filled with ruthlessness. Jian Wushuang rolled his eyes and said, "Didn't you hear what they said? This is the princess's manor, so it's best to be careful." Since he didn't notice us. Before he could finish, Jian Wushuang's face darkened. Not good. He was the first to attack. He condensed his psyche power into a single point. Although he had lost a lot of it because of the previous burning, it was still more than enough to deal with a mid-stage Aurus core cultivator. However, this attack carried the threat of being discovered. This was the Imperial City, so there might be a nascent soul cultivator watching this place from the shadows. Although his psyche power had already been burned once, it wasn't a problem for him to hide from the nascent soul stage. However, once he started fighting, if even a trace of his aura leaked out, he might be discovered. Moreover, he couldn't kill the captured celestial execution guards, or else he would be traced to their hiding place. Therefore, Jian Wushuang didn't prepare to attack. However, the other party discovered his position at a close distance. Jian Wushuang's expression changed drastically. A mid-gold core realm expert would not be able to detect them. However, the other party was able to detect them. He must have a rare treasure. Freeze! Jian Wushuang pointed his finger and the dim light penetrated the man's forehead, directly stunning his soul. Cripple his cultivation first. As soon as he gave the order, Xianxia instantly attacked. He directly crushed the golden core of the 5 coins golden snake guard. Xianxia's movements are very fast. In just an instant, he has broken the other party's golden core. Phew! Jian Wushuang heaved a sigh of relief. He waved his hand to signal the two of them to step back and walked over alone. Now answer whatever I ask. If you understand, nod your head. The golden snake guard standing in the corner nodded his head stiffly. His eyes were empty, as if he had been enslaved. Jian Wushuang's powerful psyche power had shattered the other party's consciousness, leaving only the memories in his sea of consciousness. In this way, he could ask the other party what he wanted to know and ensure that the other party would not die. This way, the Xianxia guards wouldn't notice. However, there was also a drawback. If the Xianxia guards couldn't find this person, they would definitely send someone else. Moreover, he had only controlled one of the 2 remaining immortal execution guards, the golden snake guard. To be on the safe side, Jian Wushuang had to deal with the other one. Are there any nascent soul cultivators in the celestial slaying troupe? Jian Wushuang asked the first question. He was also quite curious if there were any nascent soul cultivators in the Xianxia guards. If there were, he would have to be extra careful. Yes, the commander is a false nascent soul cultivator. The golden snake guard replied like a puppet. Fake nascent soul? Jian Wushuang was a little surprised. He would have been calm if it was a nascent soul realm cultivator. After all, there were many late-stage golden core realm cultivators in the immortal slaying troupe, so it was normal for them to have nascent soul realm cultivators. However, he did not expect the commander to be a false nascent soul realm cultivator. Fake nascent soul cultivators were different from nascent soul cultivators. At the very least, there was a huge difference in their combat strength and cultivation level. It was more accurate to call it a dead nascent soul cultivator because the nascent soul had yet to form and had become a dead nascent soul. Generally speaking, this kind of cultivator would explode and die. However, if they prepared treasures in advance to maintain their breathing, they could save their lives, but they would also lose all their cultivation. To be able to condense a dead infant, the other party must have some kind of unique inheritance. This inheritance was nothing to Jian Wushuang. He had 10,000 ways to deal with it. However, for a mortal cultivator to obtain such an inheritance, it was obvious that he was not simple. Jian Wushuang asked a lot of questions about the commander, such as his age and characteristics, and what kind of cultivation method he practiced. Initially, he had thought that he would be fishing for fish with a big net and ask more questions. He did not care if he could answer them or not. However, he did not expect him to ask so many questions. This commander was originally an orphan. By a twist of fate, he entered the palace and became a eunuch. Due to his unique constitution, he was naturally able to cultivate. The former emperor saw him as promising and kept him close to nurture him, effectively cultivating one of his own. Throughout the history of the Tang dynasty, every emperor practiced cultivation, yet they all suffered short lives. Many of those who reached the late stage of the golden core cultivation fell due to their cultivation practices. Only by reaching the nascent soul stage could one attain some longevity, though not for long. For instance, some at the nascent soul stage could live for 1,000 years, but Tang emperors only had lifespans of 200 or 300 years. The reason for this remained unknown. To consolidate imperial power, each Tang emperor cultivated a group of trusted and powerful mysterious cultivators. Thus, the Xianxia Guard came into being. However, they were not originally called the Xianxia Guard, as the name was too exaggerated and might offend cultivation sects. It wasn't until 3 years ago, after the Tang emperor was forced to abdicate and the throne was usurped, that the name was changed to Xianxia Guard. Since then, their supervision of sects across the land had become increasingly stringent. Jian Wushuang carefully pondered the information he had obtained. The commander was a trusted minister of the former emperor and naturally became a close confidant of the new emperor after the change of power. His strength was formidable. Although he was a pseudo-nascent soul-stage cultivator, 3 years ago, he had resisted a surprise attack from a foreign king, single-handedly fighting off 3 adversaries while successfully helping the current emperor escape. Later, he assisted the current Tang emperor in reclaiming the throne. Such merit and such strength. Even Jian Wushuang had to take him seriously. Let's go. Under the current circumstances, leaving was the best option. Due to Zhang Shang's situation, Jian Wushuang suspected that they were already targeted by the Tang emperor. However, he was curious as to why the Tang emperor hadn't sent the Xianxia guard to capture them, but instead, a group of demonic cultivators. There was also the warning from Baoguang Temple. One last question. How much do you know about the Zhang Kingdom in the southern sky realm? Jian Wushuang couldn't help but ask this question. This also caused Zhang Shang behind him to be taken aback and equally curious. The clever Zhang Shang was well aware of the current situation. As soon as she entered Taiyan City, she was warned by Master Fangjue of Baoguang Temple to leave the city. Subsequently, they were ambushed by demonic sects, which must have some indescribable connection to her background. Moreover, she had an inexplicable feeling towards Baoguang Temple. All these things led her to suspect that the Zhang Kingdom, or perhaps her mother, had some complex ties with the Tang dynasty. After all, her mother came from the Tang dynasty and was no ordinary person there. She might even be connected to the royal family. The wooden-faced golden snake guard paused for a moment and then slowly said, I know a little. I was once ordered to go to the Zhang Kingdom to find a female immortal named Zhang Shang. Zhang Shang. Jian Wushuang was incredulous and then asked excitedly, What happened next? We didn't find her. Zhang Shang and Zhang Shang? Jian Wushuang gasped, glancing back at Zhang Shang, as 2 figures emerged in his mind. One was Zhang Shang, and the other was Zhang Shang. He had always been mistaken. Zhang Shang was not the Zhang Shang he once knew, but very likely her mother. It was quite normal for the 2 to look identical, and the totem on their bodies could be inherited through bloodline. With this thought, Jian Wushuang's breath reversed. Seeing his strange expression, Zhang Shang was at a loss. Why are you looking for Zhang Shang? How much do you know about her? Jian Wushuang asked 2 questions in a row. Xianxia, standing beside him, was a little confused. He didn't understand much about this, so he asked, puzzled, Is Zhang Shang confused with Zhang Shang? Shut up. Jian Wushuang turned and glared at Xianxia. Frightened, Xianxia immediately shut his mouth and remained silent. I don't know, the golden snake guard replied in a wooden tone. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang slightly closed his eyes. When he opened them again, his figure flickered suddenly and rushed straight to the backyard of the princess's mansion. He reached out and grabbed another golden snake guard. He directly used thought power to control the opponent and asked the same question again. Unfortunately, the answer was still unknown. Jian Wushuang had no choice but to place the 2 of them in a dark secret passage. At this time, Zhang Shang couldn't help but speak. Senior, do you know my mother? Her name is Zhang Shang, right? Zhang Shang nodded apologetically upon hearing this, as she had not mentioned it to Jian Wushuang. Because in her heart, her mother's secret was more important, and she hadn't mentioned it even to those closest to her. Jian Wushuang did not blame her, as it was a personal matter. He was just curious and asked, Why do you have the same surname as your mother? I don't know either. Maybe it's just a coincidence. Zhang Shang shook her head. This was just a matter of curiosity. Jian Wushuang was more concerned about where Zhang Shang was. Would the other party recognize her? Or did they know what was going on in this world? He was increasingly curious about this place. Perhaps this time he did not come in vain. It might be the opportunity for him to undergo the divine tribulation, but now he was stuck in the lower realm and he couldn't rush. He had to explore slowly. At this moment, his mindset had naturally changed, coming from the mortal world and returning to the mortal world, using this as a foundation to strive for the divine tribulation. Now, what he needed to do was to return to his original state, that is, to restore the full power of his true self, and then undergo the divine tribulation. Hopefully, Jian Wushuang muttered in his heart. The rainy night continued. There were only scattered lights in the princess's mansion, and as for Jian Wushuang's hiding place, it was an abandoned garden that few people visited during the day, let alone at night. Moreover, the servants in the princess's mansion were spreading rumors that the garden was haunted recently, often hearing someone crying, and it was a male ghost crying miserably. And today was no exception. Ha! Jian Wushuang furrowed his brow, and his figure ghosted out of the rockery. It wasn't that he heard crying, but someone had quietly entered the back garden, clad in white with a noble face, yet there was a hint of sorrow between the brows. Jian Wushuang recognized the person's identity and was surprised in his heart. Is it him? In the entire princess's mansion, he was the person with the highest thought power and fortune. Apart from him, there was the princess, whose fortune could suppress the imperial princess, and this person was undoubtedly the prince consort. It was just unexpected that this prince consort would come to this remote back garden in the middle of the night. Jian Wushuang was not worried that the other party would enter the secret passage in the rockery. He wasn't that unlucky. The passage had been abandoned for a long time, and the prince consort probably didn't know about it. As expected, the other party just walked to a peach tree, holding a lantern, and rummaged at the root for a while, as if looking for something. Unfortunately, he didn't find anything. Unconvinced, he searched the other peach trees, muttering something under his breath. But the distance was too far for others to hear. However, Jian Wushuang's powerful thought power clearly captured the other party's voice. Impossible. Chai Jiu said he would help me check. The prince consort muttered as he held the lantern and searched, anxiously digging into the black soil with his delicate hands, which soon bled. The pain was excruciating, as if the fingers were connected to his heart. But it didn't stop him. Instead, he seemed to have lost his mind, tossing away the lantern and sitting down heavily, crying out in agony. Fortunately, the garden was vast and far from the inhabited courtyards, making it difficult to hear unless one listened carefully. Jian Wushuang found it somewhat amusing. He used his thought power to isolate the surroundings, not intending to engage with the person but also not wanting the noise to attract others, so he silenced the area. However, just as he closed his eyes, the mention of Chai Jiu from the other person came to mind. This Chai Jiu was the very golden snake guard he had first captured. No wonder he entered this rockery, and the secret passage behind it was so familiar. It turned out he knew the prince consort and frequently visited here, which explained his familiarity. Thinking of how the prince consort was searching for news brought by Chai Jiu, Jian Wushuang asked, "Do you know the prince consort?" "Yes." Chai Jiu nodded woodenly. Beside him, Xianxia grinned mischievously. "This guy isn't having an affair with the prince consort, is he?" "Ah." Zhang Shang blushed but had heard of such preferences and shyly lowered his head. Jian Wushuang sighed, feeling that it was no wonder Xing Luo had no interest in Xiangyang. This guy appeared upright but was full of treacherous thoughts. Rolling his eyes, he continued, "What is your relationship with the prince consort, and what has he asked you to investigate?" "We're friends. I often gamble and owe a lot of money outside. The prince consort helped me clear my gambling debts, so I help him with some minor tasks. One of those tasks was to gather information about someone for the prince consort. She was his sweetheart before he passed the imperial exams. A month ago, I found out she was abused by a group of young lords. The prince consort was furious and asked me to investigate the culprits. Originally, it was just for amusement, but it turned out to be such a coincidence." Jian Wushuang and his companions widened their eyes, asking in unison, "Is the sweetheart's name Az?" "Yes." Chai Jiu nodded emphatically. "What a coincidence." The girl they encountered at the dock, who asked him to find someone, turned out to be the prince consort squatting on the ground, crying. "Sigh." Jian Wushuang sighed again. He had intended to find the heartless man and kill him with one sword but didn't expect the two to be truly in love. The prince consort must have his reasons. Such deep sorrow, he must truly be heartbroken. Jian Wushuang took out an oil paper letter from his bosom, intending to hand it to Chaijiu to give to the prince consort. But on second thought, he realized that his current situation in Tian City was precarious due to the lack of a stable foothold. Perhaps he could use the prince consort's influence to hide in the imperial city. With this in mind, Jian Wushuang held the letter between his fingers and stood up. He decided to deliver it personally. Whoosh! He appeared directly, without any hesitation. Swish! His body hovered more than a foot above the ground, and Jian Wushuang looked down at the prince consort, Chen Yuan, before him. You! Chen Yuan was startled and quickly stepped back. Jian Wushuang casually tossed the letter to Chen Yuan and said calmly, "Don't be afraid. I was just entrusted by someone to deliver this letter to you." A letter. Chen Yuan looked thoughtfully at the oil paper envelope. At first, he thought of court disputes. In the court, officials' every word could be deadly. Outside the court, swords and blades were everywhere, and every step was like walking on thin ice. Even as the imperial son-in-law, he was not exempt. Therefore, he assumed Jian Wushuang was a retainer of some important figure, intending to engage in secret correspondence with him. But as he picked up the oil paper envelope, a sense of unease filled his heart. Looking at the yellowed oil paper, his thoughts seemed to return to the summer 3 years ago. In a village in the Shanhai County, there was a small stream. On the bank, a young man and woman, talented and beautiful. Chen Yuan, after you go to the capital, will you come back? I will, because I promised your parents I would marry you, of course. I will come back, but you'll be gone for more than a year. I can write to you, but I can't write. Then draw pictures. But I don't have money to send letters? The young scholar flipped through his book, his eyes fixed on the girl as he said, "Then draw everything you want to say to me, and give it to me in person when I return. No, if it takes too long, the paper will rot. Use oil paper." 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. Holding the oil paper envelope, Chen Yuan felt a lump in his throat, a thorn in his back, and his scalp tingled with emotion. He thought of it but dared not believe it. The girl was just a fisherman's daughter. How could she have the means to entrust a celestial being with a letter? But when he opened the oil paper envelope and saw the crooked handwriting inside, his eyes instantly turned red, bloodshot. Z. Chen Yuan covered his mouth, trying to maintain his composure, but his heart was so twisted that he couldn't stand up straight. Of all the words in the world, love is the most painful. Jian Wushuang sighed inwardly, though outwardly he still intended to intimidate the other party. Chen Yuan, you heartless man, Miss Azzy waited for you every day at the dock, while you lived like royalty in Tian City. How can you face Miss Azzy? His voice was like a great bell, as if scolding a junior. Chen Yuan nodded like a pecking chicken, his voice hoarse as he said, "It's my fault. I failed her. Since you understand, then prepare to die. Miss Azzy saved my life at sea. Today, I will avenge her by killing you, the heartless man, and then avenging her." Jian Wushuang finished speaking and drew his sword, ready to strike. Unexpectedly, the other party did not shout or scream, just stretched his neck, waiting to die. This baffled Jian Wushuang. Although Chen Yuan was indeed deeply in love with Azzy, his calmness in the face of death made Jian Wushuang regard him in a new light. Since this approach doesn't work, let's try another way. Jian Wushuang hadn't really intended to kill Chen Yuan. The sword rested on Chen Yuan's neck, but there was no killing intent in his eyes. "Senior, do it." Chen Yuan twisted his neck, ready to accept death. In this situation, Jian Wushuang had a backup plan. Looking at Chen Yuan, he said in a solemn tone, "Haha, Azzy was right about you. You're not even afraid of death, so it seems there must be another reason for not returning from the capital. I was testing you. If you had been cowardly, I would have killed you and then gone after the murderer of Miss Azzy. Now, seeing that you are a man, I spare your life. But I will never be able to get over Azzy's death." Chen Yuan's face was ashen, without any joy of surviving, rather a bit of disappointment. He had truly intended to prove his sincerity with his death. Jian Wushuang understood this sentiment. What followed was his skillful consolation and guidance, quickly shaping him into the imposing image of an overseas celestial just entering the mortal world. He even detailed how Azzy had depleted her strength while saving him to ensure logical coherence and prevent any suspicion.